Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Orochimaru kidnapped female Naruto. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. Sasuke stared angrily at the white ceiling. He was back in Konoha, dragged back there by the Dobi. The very thought of it made him grind his teeth, especially when Itachi was still alive. He had killed Orochimaru, that bastard, when he had tried to transfer into Sasuke's body. The Uchiha sneered mentally, as if he'd ever allow anyone to take over his body. Orochimaru was a first-class idiot to have believed that Sasuke would actually give up his body for power. After disposing of the snake, he had searched for the perfect opportunity to kill Itachi for almost 3 years. Itachi was slippery, he was hard to find, and the few times Sasuke did see him, Itachi was either with his partner, or would disappear quickly. Finally, he managed to find his brother at the Konoha-Suna border. Itachi had been alone at the time. Sasuke had attacked quickly and brutally, and was pleased to note he had grown stronger under Orochimaru's tutelage. He had managed to land a few hits on his Aniki, but Itachi had distracted him, then tried to use Tsukiyomi on him. But this time Sasuke's own Sharingan had matured enough for him to fight back, although the result of him trying to keep out of Tsukiyomi had been very draining to his chakra. Before he collapsed, though, he had slashed a satisfyingly deep cut through the front of Itachi's torso that would take a long time to heal, and would definitely leave a scar to remind the older Uchiha of his brother. His brother's blue-skinned partner had appeared a few minutes after both the Uchiha had collapsed. The Shark Man had quickly assessed the situation, picked up Itachi carefully, and vanished from sight, leaving Sasuke in a heap on the somewhat sandy ground. It took a lot of effort on Sasuke's part to remain conscious after the Akatsuki duo left, to guard against any sneak retaliation. Just as he was about to black out, he heard a voice, one he hadn't heard in nearly 6 years, shouting loudly, and an orange-clad figure came crashing into view. Bright blonde hair, whisker-scarred cheeks and crystal blue eyes, the likes of which he had never seen in anyone else, appeared in his shrinking vision range, and he watched the somewhat familiar yet different features look down at him with concern etched into them, and he blacked out. And when he woke up, he found himself staring at the ceiling, unable to move his limbs due to chakra restraints. Looking at the table under the window to his right, he could see 2 small transparent glass vases. Both vases held a single flower, each in varying states of freshness. The vase on the right held a fresh daffodil and the other vase had a thoroughly wilted wildflower. A flower that one could sometimes see growing in fields or by the side of the road. He wondered who they were from. He knew the fresh one was probably from Sakura, but he couldn't figure out who the wilted flower might be from. It couldn't be just another fangirl. They probably didn't have high enough security clearance to visit him, let alone know that he was back. The sound of the door sliding open caught his attention, but he kept his eyes on the flowers. A powerful chakra signature entered, followed by 2 weaker ones. He could recognize the weakest one to be Sakura, although he hadn't come into contact with her since the pathetic rescue attempt at Kusa no Kuni. Judging by the chakra signature alone, he could tell that she had grown. Uchiha Sasuke, stated a terse voice. A spike of chakra, and he could feel the chakra restraints dissolved. Slowly, he turned towards the voice. Renowned medic Nin and Hokage of Konoha, Tsunade, stood there with Sakura and a dark brown-haired lady flanking her. He refused to look at Sakura, and focused his eyes on the blonde lady, who didn't look any older than what he remembered. The Hokage's face was serious, with a very slight curl of her upper lip. Your body has healed fine. No debilitating injuries were observed when you were first brought in 11 days ago. You will be discharged today, but Morino Ibiki has a few questions to ask. Get dressed, and the Anbu outside your door will escort you to the torture and interrogation unit building, Tsunade said. She then whirled and said to Sakura, you have 5 minutes, and left with the other woman. Sasuke looked to the ceiling again. The name Morino Ibiki was vaguely familiar, and an image of a big, tall man wearing a black trench coat floated into his vision. That was it. Morino had been the first examiner of the Chunin exams all those years ago. A soft cough disturbed his thoughts, but he still refused to look at the kunoichi standing beside his bed. Undaunted, Sakura moved to the table by the window and took out the daffodil, replacing it with one she had brought with her. With a small smile she said, I'm glad you're better, Sasuke-kun. I've been checking up on you almost every day, when my schedule allows me to. Sasuke noted the lack of the usual whiny and simpering tone, and wondered, and hoped, she had lost the silly infatuation. Naruto. She continued hesitantly as her fingers absently played with the flower she had just removed, and Sasuke tensed a little at that name. Naruto came only once after he brought you back. He said he's found you at the Suna-Konoha border when he was returning from Suna with Jiraiya-sama. Then he didn't come again. I'm a little worried about him. I haven't seen him after the day he came to visit you. She finished playing with the flower and turned to Sasuke, a little hurt that he wouldn't look at her. Pushing back her disappointment, she gave him a small smile and said, well, I have to go. I'm about due back from my break. Your clothes are in the drawer on your left. Someone cleaned and repaired them, and left them there. Don't know who. The medic Nin's smile left her face and she walked to the door, where she paused and turned to look over her shoulder. I'm glad you're back, Sasuke-kun. I'm sure Naruto is, too. Then she quietly left. Naruto sat hugging his knees as the wind blew his bright yellow hair into a mess. He had grown it out over time, the excuse being that it was easier to do Harijizo, and now it reached his shoulders. His Hite-8 kept his bangs out of his eyes, and he had given thought to tying up his hair like Iruka-sensei and Shikamaru. He was sitting at his favorite place to be alone and think, on top of the Yondaime's head on the Hokage monument. He loved sitting on his hero's head, and he could see Konoha stretched out below him. It was early evening and lights were starting to blink here and there in the village. The blonde's thoughts turned toward the traitor he had carried back all the way from the Suna-Konoha border. Tsunade Obachan had informed him that the Uchiha would be interrogated. He couldn't say anything to that. It was standard procedure, and Sasuke had run up to the arch-enemy of Konoha, after all. He didn't really know what to think of it all just yet, which was why he had only visited his former teammate once the day after he was brought back. He had washed and patched up Sasuke's clothes to the best of his ability, which wasn't too shabby, since Iruka-sensei had insisted, threatened, that he learned to sew properly, among other skills the man thought necessary. His excuses were mission reports and debriefs, and minor missions he had been assigned, more like asked for, after that first day. And he hadn't bothered to replace the wildflower he brought during his first visit. It was the 5th day since Sasuke had been taken to the torture and interrogation unit. Naruto knew that the interrogation had actually ended 3 days earlier, since the former traitor had told them pretty much most of what had happened to him, and what he left out Ino, who had joined T&I, had dug out of his memory. Sasuke had been uncharacteristically forthcoming with answers that they didn't have to resort to their other specialty, torture, on him. He probably didn't give a damn about the information he was giving them, except when it came to his abilities and Uchiha Itachi. Then he had been a little reluctant, but he didn't put up much resistance once Ino got to work. Naruto pondered about that. Tsunade Obachan had briefed him on their findings. She had been shocked to learn that Sasuke killed Orochimaru. Naruto had been shocked at first, but then he realized that this was Uchiha Sasuke, a powerful shinobi. Plus, Orochimaru had been at his weakest point due to the urgency for the body transfer to occur. Hey, Sasuke wasn't so great after all. He was just lucky that the Habiteme had been weak. A small pigeon circled above his head and landed on his foot, and cooed at him. Naruto gave the pigeon a tiny smile and detached the slip of paper placed in a small holder on the bird's leg. He read the note from Tsunade Obachan as he stroked the pigeon's back with the other hand. The note was a simple summons for him to meet her now. There was no explanation as to the reason for the meeting, but the word, now, was underlined 3 times. Naruto raised an eyebrow at that, and then realized that the rest of the note was written with harsh strokes. He wondered what the old lady was pissed about this time. She had been rather furious when he had showed up after a year-long goodwill mission to Suna with a bloody Sasuke on his back and a seemingly nonchalant Jiraiya in tow. Then 2 days ago something or someone had angered her enough for her to throw both her chair and pieces of her shattered desk out the window. She had also drunk herself into a stupor after that, although only a select few knew about it. A small sigh escaped him as he stood up, causing the pigeon to squawk and fly off indignantly. He stretched his arms skyward and yawned a jaw-cracking yawn, then formed the seals for Shunshin no Jutsu. A burst of chakra later found him in front of the Hokage's office, and the two Anbu members posted outside the door let him in as he greeted them enthusiastically, although there was slight apprehension curling in his belly. "Tsunade Obachan," he said loudly, grinning as he dodged a scroll she threw at him for calling her that. It was their little tradition. "What's so important you have to meet me now, huh? Why couldn't it wait?" He trailed off as he saw the tight look on the Hokage's face, and Jiraiya looking uncharacteristically serious as he stood leaning against the large window with his arms crossed. "Tsunade Obachan, Uzumaki Kame Naruto," began Tsunade, and immediately the younger blonde stiffened and a deep frown crossed his face. "Tsunade Obachan," he started, but stopped as she waved authoritatively at him, then gestured for him to have a seat in front of her new desk. The little curl of apprehension he had earlier expanded into a flame and his features became serious as he waited for her to continue. "This is about Sasuke, isn't it?" he asked, all playfulness dropped. The Hokage looked at him with what he interpreted as guilt and sorrow in her eyes. "Uzumaki Kame Naruto," she repeated, disregarding the displeased look on the other's face. "I am happy to tell you that the council is willing to pardon Uchiha Sasuke." Naruto's eyes narrowed shrewdly. "At what price?" Tsunade smiled a little inwardly. She knew Naruto was no longer as dense or idiotic as he still pretended to be. Uchiha Sasuke has to marry someone to prove his loyalty to Konoha no Sato. The blonde in front of her folded his arms. "As grateful as I am to be informed of matters regarding the Uchiha, what does him marrying anyone have to do with me?" "I assume it has something to do with me, based on your tone of voice." Jiraiya snorted where he was standing, and Tsunade became distinctly uncomfortable, something she wouldn't show to anyone other than Shizune, Sakura, Jiraiya and Naruto. "The council has decided that you are to marry Uchiha." A few seconds, then. "Nani?" Naruto jumped out of his chair in anger and slammed his fists onto the table. "This is a joke, isn't it? Please tell me this is a joke? Please?" Tsunade almost quailed at the way his voice turned pleading by the last word. "I'm sorry, Kame, but it's no joke." Naruto sank back into his chair in a daze. "You called me by that name. You're serious, aren't you? Does this mean that you're going to reveal my secret? Everyone's going to know that I'm actually a girl?" He, or rather, she, gripped the armrests of her chair tightly. "Not immediately, Kame. It's your secret, so it's up to you to reveal it when you are ready, but I will have to reveal it for you if you take too long." "Why me?" "Damn the council. They knew that Sarutobi-sensei had put the genjutsu on you all those years ago. They want the Uchiha line to continue, and they want to make sure the offspring are viable." Here Tsunade sneered and made air quotes with her fingers as Jiraiya snorted again. "So they want a strong female to bear the Uchiha children. Plus, they think it's added incentive for the Uchiha to remain loyal to Konoha, because of two factors. Your fierce loyalty to Konoha, which they hope will rub off on him, and the interest Akatsuki have in you. They want me to produce Uchiha babies and act as bait for Itachi?" Naruto asked incredulously, her eyebrows shooting up. Jiraiya decided to contribute to the conversation. "Those geezers. They don't care what happens to Naruto, as long as they keep Uchiha happy enough to produce Sharingan babies for them. I bet the whole part about strong females to bear Uchiha children was purest crap. Anything for the Uchiha, as long as he remains loyal to the village." Tsunade sighed and massaged her temples. "It's true. They also demand that Uchiha be given special training with Kakashi, or any instructor he asks for, actually, to mollify him and prepare him to fight Itachi. Then he must be allowed a certain time period in which he's allowed to dangle you as bait and finish off Itachi. And they dared to insinuate that if you'd be somehow killed in the process, all the better. All this so that Sasuke stays in Konoha. They really love him, don't they?" Naruto said softly with downcast eyes. "Of course. Who wouldn't jump at the chance of getting rid of the Kyuubi no Gaki?" The last part was added in a whisper, but the two Sannin caught it anyway, and Tsunade's heart constricted painfully as she looked at the blonde girl henged as a boy before her. No, she couldn't really be called a girl anymore since she would be turning 18 this year. A young woman on the brink of adulthood, who for safety purposes, had had to masquerade as a male from the time she was a child, since many of the people of Konoha were close-minded idiots with misplaced hate since they couldn't differentiate between the Kyuubi and the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki. "But why'd I have to marry the Teme? I'm good enough bait no matter what my position is," Naruto said, bleakness lacing her tone. Because, as his wife, Tsunade spat out the word, he would have the authority to order you around, to a certain extent. Plus they want healthy Uchiha babies. Su-ka. Naruto replied softly. Then in a stronger voice, she asked, what if I say no? Here Tsunade looked downright murderous, and Jiraiya's expression was not too different. The council implied rather forcefully that you will never be considered as a Hokage candidate if you refuse. And unfortunately, the council does have a major say in appointing a Hokage. Naruto's face took on a defeated look. I see. Tsunade hated that look on Naruto's face. It was so out of place on a face she had come to associate with shit-eating grins and mischievous smiles, even though she knew that most of the smiles were part of Naruto's mask. Uzumaki Kame Naruto, what are your feelings toward Uchiha? If you don't want to do this, even if you have the slightest reservation or hesitation about it, let me know. I'll call it off, council and Uchiha be damned, she said fiercely. Naruto was quiet for a few moments, but Tsunade could see she was tense by the way she gripped the armrests of her chair. Sasuke's my friend. He's one of my precious people, began Naruto, but Jiraiya cut her off. I know about your stand as a ninja, to protect your precious people, but Naruto, sometimes you have to think about yourself. Could you live with Uchiha for the rest of your life if you had to? Is he really worth it? Naruto was quiet for a moment after the Gamma Sennin's outburst, then she answered uncertainly, I know that, Arrow Sennin. But Sasuke is important to me. But I don't know if I like him that way or not. Tsunade-sama, could I have time to think about it? Please? Tsunade and Jiraiya could tell the young woman was being extra serious when she called the Hokage Tsunade-sama instead of her usual nickname. Tsunade felt sorrow and anger rise in her as she looked at the whisker-marked face and sad eyes in front of her, already missing the sparkle usually always present in the sky-blue eyes. Of course, Naruto. But I unfortunately have to answer the council 2 days from now, and I still have to inform Uchiha of the situation. Which I will do only if you agree to it. Naruto stood up shakily, as did Tsunade. I understand, Tsunade-sama. I'll let you have the answer by 6 in the evening tomorrow. Tsunade impulsively reached over her desk and gently brushed blonde locks out of Naruto's cerulean blue eyes. Don't feel pressured into agreeing, Naruto. Don't worry about the council or Uchiha, damn them. I don't care. The council will have to find another way of convincing the Uchiha to stay if you disagree. I'm not going to force you to do this if you don't want to, Tsunade said as she patted the blonde head in front of her gently. Naruto leaned faintly into the touch, then nodded. With a weak smile she said, by 6 tomorrow, then. I need to go. I've a lot to think about. Oyasumi, Tsunade Obachan, Arrow Sennin. Naruto gave them a half-hearted wave and disappeared outside the door. Immediately, Tsunade collapsed into her chair and produced 2 sake saucers and a bottle of the liquor. Jiraiya took the bottle out of her hands and poured 1 saucer for her and 1 for himself, noting that it was the strongest sake Tsunade had in stock. The Hokage tossed back the sake quickly and poured herself another round. She's going to agree, I can tell, Jiraiya stated morosely as he helped himself to the bottle. He took a sip and continued, she cares too much about Uchiha. All that 3 years of training just to get the traitor back. And now that she could be the key to him staying in the village, she'd definitely agree to the council's plan. Damn the council for exploiting her loyalty to Konoha and her feelings for Uchiha. Tsunade took a few gulps from the bottle, her saucer ignored on the desk as she tried to alleviate the forming headache. You think she's in love with Uchiha, then? Probably. Probably doesn't realize it herself, either. Damn those 2 geezers, swore Jiraiya again. Tsunade set the bottle down and the white-haired man grabbed it. I should have reformed the council years ago when I started this job, Tsunade said, starting to slur slightly. They got too much power, and the Hokage is just a puppet. After the Uchiha thing is cleared up, that's the firstish thing I'm gonna do. Jiraiya nodded his agreement, and the 2 quietly finished the bottle of sake between them. Naruto heard the rustling of the flap behind her, and sensed a chakra signature that was well known to her, but remained listlessly as she was. Yo, Kakashi's voice stated from behind her. Naruto just kept swirling the noodles round and round in the bowl using her chopsticks. Her head was propped up on the hand not holding the chopsticks, which rested on the counter. The silver-haired Junin settled into the stool on her left, and mirrored her pose, with his head in his right hand. The blonde stared at the ramen bowl for a few more moments before asking, "How far would you go for a friend, Kakashi-sensei?" The Junin was immediately wary as he noted how serious his former student sounded, in addition to the disinterest in ramen. "You know my views on friends, Naruto. Those who disobey the rules are trash, but those who abandon their friends are worse than trash," Naruto finished, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I remember that well, Kakashi-sensei. But how far would you go for a friend, Kakashi-sensei? Especially one who doesn't seem to appreciate what you do for them. And now you've been offered a way to make sure that friend is safe, but possibly at the cost of your dream." Kakashi narrowed his visible eye at Naruto, then straightened up. He rested both his elbows on the counter and his chin on his folded hands. "How important is this friend to me? Is this safety what the friend really wants? Does the friend even realize what he really wants? Will I be able to live with the consequences of my choice, even if my friend ends up safe?" Kakashi mused aloud. "Huh? That's what I would ask myself," explained Kakashi. "Although, if that friend was extremely important to me, which answers the first question, I guess I'd overlook the other questions. Except maybe the last one. I assume we're talking about Sasuke?" Naruto gave him a weak grin. "You know me too well, Kakashi-sensei." She got a happy eye crescent from him. "Sasuke is important to me, sensei. But, man, this is awkward. I don't know if my feelings for him are just at deep friendship level or whether they go much deeper than that." "Basically you're not sure if you're in love with him or not," Kakashi stated calmly, not looking at the blonde. Naruto spluttered. "In love? What? No way, man, how could I be in love with that Teme? He's a guy," she screeched loudly, arms flailing. Kakashi grinned at the defensive behavior. Naruto seemed to have forgotten that she was in fact wondering if she had deeper feelings for Sasuke just a moment earlier. "Well, Kame, I'm sure you won't have any problems with him being a guy," Kakashi said with a lecherous wink. Naruto blushed and swung her fist off Kakashi's head. The Junin didn't bother evading the blow, but chuckled at the blonde. "Pervert," the blonde exclaimed. "And don't call me by that name while I'm not in that form," she added in a soft whisper. "Ah, sumimasen, Naruto," Kakashi said, not really meaning it. "Care to tell me what this cost of Sasuke's safety is that you're talking about?" Naruto shook her head. "Not yet, Kaka-sensei." "Ah." A pause. "Then, you've received information about his whereabouts?" A wry smile. "Something like that." "Ah." The blonde made a conscious effort to shake off her gloomy mood, and gave her sensei a big smile. "So what brings you here?" "Kakashi-sensei. Just finished my mission. Thought I'd aggravate Tsunade-sama by delaying my report." Happy eye crescent. Naruto grinned and pointed her chopsticks at him. "You'd better not be doing that when I'm Hokage." Her grin faltered a little as she was reminded of the consequences of disagreeing with the council, but she pushed it to the back of her mind, and hoped, rather futilely, that Kakashi hadn't noticed. Quickly, she continued, "If you're late I'll ban all Icha books in Konoha." Kakashi had noted how she had quickly covered up, and was suspicious. He made a mental note to speak to Tsunade about it, but decided to humor Naruto for now. "No," he squealed like a schoolgirl, "or Sakura," he thought mischievously, grinning under his mask. "You wouldn't. You couldn't do that to your beloved sensei." Naruto laughed, and Kakashi was somewhat relieved to hear her. Her earlier somber mood didn't suit her at all. "You bet I will," Naruto declared, a sparkle in her eyes. Kakashi made a tragic face, or at least as tragic as a small patch of skin and a single eye could get, and Naruto laughed again. "When did you get back from Suna?" "About 5 or 6 days ago. Suna was nice, Gaara was really nice to me. Kankuru too. And Gaara got a famous Suna swordsman to teach me kenjutsu and hone my elemental affinity too. It was really good of him." "That's great." "Yeah, then Temari came back with me. She definitely missed Shikamaru, even though she was complaining about him all the way." She threw her chopsticks into the bowl and stood up. "Thanks, Kaka-sensei. I needed that. Be seeing you round, then." She placed a few Ryu notes on the counter and left with her hands behind her head. Kakashi stared after her for a while, then turned back to the stand. "Tuchi-san," he called. The owner of Ichiraku Ramen came out from behind the stand. "Ah, Kakashi-san, how can I help you?" Been a while since I last saw you. Tucci greeted jovially as he wiped his hands on his apron. Oh, I'm not here for a meal, unfortunately. But I did want to ask you, has anything happened while I was gone? Has Naruto been okay? Nothing spectacular happened, as far as I know. Naruto seemed a little down these past few days, but today he was really out of it, you know? Ah. Kakashi stood up and shoved his hands into his pockets, slouching a little. Thanks, Tucci-san. Yeah. He disappeared in a whirl of leaves. Tucci made a disgruntled face. First Naruto not finishing his ramen, and now Kakashi-san doesn't even order a bowl. What's happening these days? Tsunade looked anxiously at the clock on the wall to the right of her desk. She drummed her fingers anxiously on the pile of paperwork in front of her that she had given up doing half an hour ago since she couldn't concentrate. Jiraiya shoved a saucer of sake under her nose, and she gratefully took it and drank it. Don't worry, Tsunade-hime. She'll be on time. Tsunade swung around in her chair to look at Jiraiya, who was pouring himself some sake as he leant against the window like he did yesterday. It's not whether or not she'll be tardy that worries me, it's whether she'll be crazy enough to agree to the council's crazy scheme, she said, holding out her sake saucer for more. Jiraiya tossed back his drink, placed his saucer on the window sill and reached for hers. You know she will, Tsunade. Being Hokage is everything to her, and she'll work towards it, he replied, as he poured out the sake for her. Tsunade made an indistinct noise in her throat and took the saucer Jiraiya held out. The door banged open. Tsunade Obachan, Naruto said loudly as she bounced into the room and kicked the door shut behind her. The Hokage grimaced. Gaki, haven't I told you to knock before you enter? She reprimanded, then gulped down the sake and set aside the saucer. Naruto made herself comfortable in one of the two chairs in front of the Hokage's desk. Becoming serious, Naruto said, I've decided, Tsunade Obachan. Tsunade put her elbows on the desk and steepled her fingers. Jiraiya listened carefully, even though his posture was relaxed. And your answer is? Naruto took a deep breath and looked Tsunade in the eye. I want Sasuke safe, Obachan. I worked hard to bring him back to Konoha, and since he's here now I want to make sure he's safe. Ah, Tsunade deflated a little. The answer is yes, Obachan. Naruto said firmly. Are you sure, Gaki? Do you understand what you're saying? Jiraiya asked. Naruto's face showed a little confusion, and she said slowly, I don't know, Ero Sennin. I still don't know whether I can develop feelings for him in that way, and I don't think he'd have feelings for me in that way either. He'd just see me as a way to obtain what he wants. Jiraiya made a HMPH noise. And you still want to continue with this? Naruto lowered her eyes. I want to be Hokage, Ero Sennin, Tsunade Obachan, and I'll do my best to be Hokage even if the council is against me. I'll find a way to protect my precious people. But how can I become Hokage if I can't even save my friend? She looked up determinedly. Those who disobey the rules are trash, but those who abandon their friends are worse than trash, she quoted, her eyes resolute. I'm not lower than trash, I won't abandon my friend. Tsunade sank back in her chair and crossed her arms under her bust, and Jiraiya fell silent. Naruto. Tsunade started. Kame. Tsunade Obachan. What if I, Sasuke, refuse to produce children? Naruto asked, blushing a little. I don't want to settle down and potter about at home. I want to go out and kick ass. Tsunade rolled her eyes as she smiled a little. I'll have you know, Kame, that Hokage don't go out and kick ass, they sit in the office and do paperwork. Naruto grinned at her. That's just you, Obachan. 'Cause you always don't do your work. When I'm Hokage, I'll get someone else to do the paperwork and I'll go out on missions. Keep deluding yourself, Gaki. Tsunade smiled wryly. Now, about children. The younger blonde turned shy again. It'll be a paper marriage, will that be good enough? I don't think I want to be tied to the Teme for the rest of my life. I don't think Sasuke would want that either. Tsunade considered Naruto seriously before she nodded. I don't like the idea of you being a baby factory either. Just make sure you don't fool around with the Uchiha, or at least use protection if you do, she said, disregarding Naruto's indignant squawk and Jiraiya's lecherous laugh. And I'm sure your medical records will show you to be unable to produce children, for medical reasons, if you know what I mean. Naruto nodded, knowing that Tsunade meant to falsify information on her medical records if necessary. And as to whether you will separate in the future. That will be up to the two of you. Tsunade continued. Any other questions? Naruto nodded again. About my name, Obachan. I absolutely refuse to renounce the name Uzumaki, she said firmly, a hard glint in her eyes. She noticed both the Sannin stiffening. Her expression softened, and she said, I don't know why, but I really want to keep my name, Obachan. It means a lot to me. It gives me the feeling of belonging to a family, you know? Sandame Ogg told me years ago that Uzumaki is my real name, and that I was the last Uzumaki. So I don't ever want to give up the Uzumaki name, especially not to Sasuke. Tsunade glanced sharply at Jiraiya, whose eyebrows were furrowed. The Hokage's chest constricted, remembering the other Namikaze and Uzumaki both the Sannin had known well, especially Jiraiya. She was sure he wouldn't take very well to the name Uzumaki vanishing off the earth, and she wouldn't, either. She was both surprised and glad to see Naruto's pride in her family name. The Hokage gave the matter some thought. Well, there have been instances of clan merging, where both clan names were incorporated to form a new clan name. During the time you will be married to Uchiha, your clan name, as well as his, will be Uchiha Uzumaki. Naruto bounced in her seat, screeching indignantly, what? Why does his name come first? It should be Uzumaki Uchiha, not Uchiha Uzumaki. Jiraiya laughed uproariously, earning a sulky, what's so funny, arrow senin. From the blonde girl. Tsunade massaged her temples. The husband's clan name always comes first, Kame, whether you like it or not. Naruto realized something. Hey, my name's gonna be super long. Uchiha Uzumaki Kame Naruto. Jiraiya barked a laugh. That's definitely one mouthful. Tsunade glanced at the clock and sat up straight. A final time, Naruto. Are you sure you agree to the council's idea? Naruto also straightened in her seat, a determined look on her face. All I have to do is be his wife. Be married to him in name only, bait Itachi, wait for Sasuke to kill Itachi, and divorce him, and I'll be free to become Hokage, right? All shinobi make sacrifices for their village, this is my sacrifice. The Sharingan will is an advantage that Konoha has over other villages, and as the future Hokage it would be right to do as much as I can to ensure it remains in Konoha. Most of all, he's my friend, and I won't abandon him. Therefore, Tsunade-sama, my answer is yes. Tsunade didn't look happy, but she nodded. Not 2 seconds later, a knock sounded on the door. Enter, she said loudly. Naruto craned her neck around in her seat to look as the door opened. Shizune trotted in first, followed by 2 Anbu members who marched smartly into the Hokage's office. Behind the two were another 2 Anbu, 1 full squad, noted Naruto. And between the front 2 and back 2 was Uchiha Sasuke. Naruto immediately looked to the front, towards the windows with a faint blush tinging her cheeks. Wordlessly, Sasuke was pushed into the seat next to her, and the Anbu exited the office. Shizune stood in her usual position next to the Hokage. Uchiha Sasuke, you will be released from prison on a basis, if you agree to certain requests by the Council of Konoha. Sasuke sat mutely with an expressionless face, not bothering to indicate whether he had heard the Hokage. Tsunade frowned but continued. You will be given training by almost any shinobi of Konoha you choose, and you will be given a time frame in which you will be allowed to find and eliminate Uchiha Itachi. That had Sasuke's attention, and he turned his hard eyes to Tsunade. And the requests of the council? He asked in a monotone. You will swear loyalty to Konoha. You will not be allowed to leave Konoha for a year, except during the time given to you to hunt down Itachi. There will be Anbu following you everywhere you go. You will be sealed with a seal akin to the Hyuga's caged bird seal, and only myself, Jiraiya, Kakashi, and the Anbu squad captain will know the activation seals. And, you will have to consent to marry someone and have children to continue the Uchiha Kekkei Genkei. Sasuke's eyes narrowed as he considered this. They were practically throwing themselves at his feet to beg him to remain in Konoha. And reviving the Uchiha clan was an ambition of his, anyway. While it wasn't pleasant to have such a dangerous seal, it made sense that they would want something to control him with. Training with anyone he chose sounded good, especially since he had learned as much as he could have from the now dead Orochimaru. With more training it wouldn't be long before he was up to, or even better than, Itachi's standard. But what was the catch? And if I refuse? Tsunade steepled her fingers and rested her elbows on her desk. You will be imprisoned for life with a chakra seal, and your seed will be forcefully taken from you in order to continue the Sharingan heritage via in vitro fertilization. Sasuke frowned slightly at this, which for him was saying a lot. He quickly reviewed what information he had received so far. What was the catch? Then he realized something. I assume my bride will be chosen for me? It was more a statement than question. A strangled noise came from his right, and out of the corner of his eyes he saw him. Uzumaki Naruto. The boy who had brought him back to this place. A thought flew through his head. The Dobi had been uncharacteristically quiet all this while. Tsunade's steepled fingers curled into fists. Yes, she said a little reluctantly. Your bride has been chosen for you, for reasons that benefit you and the Uchiha line. Sasuke's attention was back on the Hokage. Do you agree to the terms? The Hokage asked. Sasuke considered his options, training and a chance to kill Itachi and revive his clan, or to rot in prison while they made test tube babies with sperm they'd squeeze out of him. He mentally shuddered at the thought that Sakura might be the one doing the squeezing. If I were to agree, what will happen after I kill Itachi? You will be reinstated as a shinobi of Konoha at Junin level, and will continue your duties as such. The Uchiha estate will be formally restored to you, and the restraining seal will be taken off once you have proved your loyalty to my satisfaction. Tsunade looked at the Uchiha, and at Naruto in her peripheral vision. She hated that the council had put Naruto in a position where she had to consent to their ridiculous scheme or give up her dream of becoming Hokage, which she was sure they weren't too supportive of in the first place. She hated the way they worshipped the Uchiha name, making light Sasuke's treason and giving him ridiculously simple terms of so-called punishment. So, Uchiha Sasuke, what is your decision? Will you agree to the council's requests, or would you prefer to return to your cell? The room went quiet for a few moments. Jiraiya shifted noiselessly against the window and stared hard at Sasuke. I agree. His voice was a monotone again. Beside him, Naruto deflated. Jiraiya crossed his arms unhappily, and Tsunade squeezed her eyes shut for a few seconds. Alright, then, Uchiha. The Hokage opened her eyes. You will probably be wondering who has been chosen as your bride. That wasn't foremost on Sasuke's brain. He had been thinking of who in Konoha would make a good sensei, until Tsunade dropped the bomb. You will be marrying Uzumaki Kame Naruto. Silence. Excuse me? He asked in a strained voice, his eyes widened a fraction. Tsunade exhaled a deep breath. You heard me right. You will be marrying Uzumaki Kame Naruto. The Uchiha clan and the Uzumaki name will merge, and will be known as the Uchiha Uzumaki clan. Sasuke stared at the Hokage with almost a sneer on his face. You want me to marry a male? That Dobi? Ignoring Naruto's shout of, I'm not a Dobi. And don't talk like I'm not right next to you. Tsunade exhaled again. I'm about to reveal a 17, almost 18-year-old secret. The boy you know as Uzumaki Naruto is in fact Uzumaki Kame, a girl. Sasuke sank back in his chair, shock showing faintly on his face. He almost asked if the Hokage was joking, but one look the serious faces of both Sannin and the Hokage's aide told him it was no joke. He glanced at Naruto, who was looking away from him, obviously not wanting to meet his eyes. Kame, Tsunade said gently, perhaps you want to dissolve the henge? Naruto sighed, then stood tiredly to face Sasuke but still did not look at him. The brunette was staring expressionlessly from his seat. Without any hand seals, Naruto said, Kai, and released a tiny amount of chakra. As Sasuke watched, Naruto's face took on more feminine features. The angles became softer, the cheeks slightly chubbier, the jawline less masculine. Her hair stayed the same, bright blonde shoulder-length spiky-ish hair. Her eyes were also the same sky blue, but her lashes were longer. She was dressed in a boy's baggy black and orange jacket and black and orange loose pants that reached above her ankles, and had on black fingerless gloves with a metal plate on the back of her hands. Unlike her face, there didn't seem to be any difference in her body. And the rest? Tsunade asked. Naruto fidgeted a little. I only henge my face nowadays, unless body contact is imminent or unavoidable. The clothes are loose enough to cover the rest, and chest bindings always help. Her voice was higher, not as squeaky and whiny as he remembered Sakura and Ino's voices to be, though. Naruto's voice was slightly husky. I see, Tsunade said, and turned back to the two young shinobi in front of her. Kamei's name had been legally altered to Uzumaki Kamei Naruto 6 years ago, after her real gender and real female name were discovered. The Hokage turned to Shizune. "Bring me the marriage contract, Shizune." The Hokage's aide bowed and left the office. Uchiha and Sasuke snapped out of the daze he was in. "Naruto, a girl?" He turned to the Hokage. "The council wished for the two of you to produce Uchiha heirs, but let me give you a warning." Tsunade stared hard at Sasuke, and he could even feel a little killer intent leaking from her and the other Sannin. "Your marriage here is only a paper marriage, a contract, or mission, if you prefer, that Kamei has graciously agreed to for your sake. I hope you understand what I mean by paper marriage. The council expects Uchiha babies, but let me make it clear. I do not expect any children from this marriage. Do I make myself clear?" Sasuke nodded. He understood the implications of Tsunade's words. It wasn't like he actually wanted to do anything with Naruto. Naruto, the person he'd thought of as a male all this time. It was rather difficult to reconcile himself to the fact that he was in fact a she, and that they were to be married. But he immediately saw the advantage of having Naruto around. She was the perfect lure for his Kyuubi hunting brother. That alone made the whole deal agreeable. As long as he had his revenge, he'd marry Sakura if he had to. Shizune returned and handed 3 sets of papers to the Hokage, who glanced at them and gave 1 copy to Naruto, who had taken her seat, and 1 to Sasuke. "Read through the contract and sign it. You will sign 3 copies, 1 for yourselves and 1 goes into the official records. By signing this you are officially engaged." The 2 young shinobi signed the papers quietly. "Good." Tsunade nodded. "The marriage is set for October 11th. "That's right. October 11th, she repeated when she saw Naruto's surprised look, knowing an outburst would soon follow. "That's 8 days from today." "You are." Naruto's screech of, "What? So soon?" disrupted her, as anticipated. The Hokage shot Naruto a look, and replied, "It was set by the council to provide you 2 more time to begin reviving the Uchiha clan, which, let me remind you, I am not expecting out of this arrangement." She paused. "Now, to continue what I had been saying, you are allowed to inform anyone of this marriage, but the reasons behind it are labeled need to know. Cook up a reasonable excuse if you're asked. Also, I don't care what the council says, but if you are both in agreement, the contract can be cancelled. In other words, you can get a divorce." "Tsunade Obachan," Naruto piped up. "I have a few people I need to tell." Tsunade frowned at her. "They are, well, Kiba, Neji, Hinata-chan, Shino and the Sand siblings know that I'm female, so I guess Shikamaru knows as well, and Hana-ni-chan and Ayame-ni-chan help me out in the more feminine aspects I need help with. Don't laugh, Ero-senin, or I'll tell the onsen owner you're in town. And Kakashi-sensei needs to know. He already knows my secret, and I have to tell Iruka-sensei." Tsunade chewed on this. "I suppose the first 10 you mentioned found out on their own. Anyone with Byakugan can probably tell you're a girl if you only henge your face. I'm the one who told Kakashi, and I know you informed Iruka and Ayame. Sakura doesn't know, does she?" Naruto looked ashamed. "No, I haven't had the chance to tell her yet, with her work and my missions and all. As I said, it'll be need-to-know information. Kakashi, Iruka and Ayame can be informed, but be sure to emphasize that it's to be kept under wraps. And if anyone else finds out, make sure they don't spill the information." Naruto nodded, giving the Hokage a big grin, despite the fact that she didn't feel too cheerful inside. "Alright, Naruto, the cage requests your presence in Suna." Something about a whisper. Naruto's eyes shone and she bounced up happily. "Sasayaki, it's ready. Gaara's the best. When do I leave?" Tsunade raised an eyebrow. "Yes, the missive mentioned a Sasayaki. You leave tomorrow morning. Be back at least 1 day before your wedding." Naruto cringed a little at the mention of wedding, and Sasuke felt a little something stir as he watched his bride-to-be go from being so happy at the thought of meeting the cage to being uneasy at the mention of marriage. He pushed down the feeling, not wanting to analyze it. The only feeling he allowed himself was hatred for Itachi. "You're dismissed. Go get some rest." Naruto said goodbye loudly to the 2 Sannin and Shizune, gave Sasuke an unreadable look and left the office. Tsunade's eyes, which followed Naruto to the door, turned back to Sasuke. "Naruto will hate me for saying this, but, even though I know she's a competent and powerful ninja, you had better not hurt her in any way, Jiraiya said from his place at the windowsill, his voice hard. Do not hurt her, Uchiha. She considers you as a person precious enough for her to put aside her own wants for. She's sacrificing so you can achieve your dream, and be safe, as she puts it. She could have disagreed, but she decided in your favor. For your sake, you'd better appreciate it, Tsunade said. If you hurt her in any way, I will personally make sure the Uchiha line will never be passed down. The Hokage pointed a finger at him. Green chakra flowed out of the finger in the form of a spike, and she slowly moved her finger horizontally, miming a slicing movement. Sasuke made no reply, his face expressionless. Tsunade stared critically at him for a while, then she nodded to Shizune, who went to the door to call the Anbu squad that had escorted him earlier. You will be staying in a new apartment that both you and Naruto will be sharing after your wedding. It's a 2-bedroom apartment. You'll also be given an allowance out of the Uchiha estate since you won't be earning money on missions like a normal shinobi. Kakashi will be informed of the situation, and will assist you with the few wedding preparations you'll need. I will seal you tomorrow. You may leave now. The Anbu squad escorted Sasuke out of the office to his new apartment. Naruto leapt through the trees as the early morning sun glinted through the mosaic of leaves above her. 2 Anbu escorts were beside her as was usual when she left Konoha for personal reasons, unless Ero Sennin accompanied her. It rankled with her that Tsunade Obachan didn't assign her any solo missions because of Akatsuki, but she understood the obvious reasons for that. The 2 Anbu, however, were not her usual escorts, Yamato Taiko and Sai, because they had a mission. She was in full female form, although she was still wearing the baggy boy's clothes, which she much preferred to girls' clothing. Her thoughts were in a whirl. She was now officially engaged to Sasuke. It made her feel better to know that she didn't have to produce babies, something she fervently thanked Tsunade Obachan for, and that she could ask for a divorce at any time, although she did wonder how a divorce would affect her chances as Hokage. And there was the disturbing knowledge that as Sasuke's wife, her chances of becoming Hokage probably weren't high either, since the council expected her to be producing Sharingan babies. Then there was the wedding to think about. Ever since she found out she was actually female, she had had a hard time coping with the physical changes, the difference in weight distribution, which affected her movements and thus her taijutsu, and most of all, menstruation. She made a disgusted face. Boys had it much easier without monthly cycles. At first, she kept in her male form as much as possible, but Tsunade advised her to get used to her real body, which was sound advice, she supposed. She guessed she was quite the tomboy. Hana Nichan and Ayame Nichan always helped her get girly stuff like bras and underwear and skirts. She hated those. But Tsunade made her wear skirts every now and then when she was off duty. And heels, she still wobbled a little on heels, in makeup. She disliked makeup the most, although she loved using a cherry-colored lip gloss that she had discovered in Suna. It kept her lips from chapping, and to be honest, she liked the cherry color on her lips, too. The 2 women, together with Hinata-chan, were always trying to get her to be more ladylike, and were always frustrated with the way she stomped around like a man, according to Hana Nichan, or slurped up ramen like a greedy pig, according to Ayame Nichan, or had less than impeccable manners, according to Hinata-chan. Hinata-chan always did say things in such a nice way. As such, she didn't really think about boyfriends and dates and weddings, although she often heard civilian girls and some kunoichi talk excitedly about those things. Her mind had been occupied with taijutsu and ninjutsu and getting Sasuke back and becoming Hokage. But now she was forced to think of her own wedding, even though it was just a paper marriage. She had heard girls chatter excitedly about romance and flowers and chocolates and jewelry. Unexpectedly, she felt a twinge of sadness to know that she wouldn't be receiving any of those things from her husband-to-be. It's just a mission, she reminded herself over and over again. I'm doing this so that Sasuke can kill Itachi, which would be one less threat for me, and then Sasuke will stay in the village. That's why I'm doing this. But it didn't ease the dull ache that had settled in a tiny corner of her heart. It was their 3rd day of travel, and Naruto knew that soon they would enter Suna territory. She looked forward to seeing Gaara again. Gaara had been very nice to her during the year-long goodwill mission she had just returned from. Towards the end of the year, he had made time to see her, to take her around, and eat lunch with her often. Even in the beginning of the year he had instructed Suna's finest swordmaster, Kujira-sensei, to teach her kenjutsu. She had also been taught quite a few Fuuten techniques, since Suna had many wind users. Then she had been taught to combine her Fuuten chakra with Kenjutsu, and Gaara and Kujira-sensei had promised to make her a good katana that could conduct chakra, like she remembered Asuma-sensei's trench knives could. But Baki-sensei had taught her Kei's no Yaiba as well, just in case she had to part with the katana. Grass changed to sand on the forest floor, and soon the trio found themselves running through the desert. The sun had risen high and was hot on their backs. Gaara! Came a shout, and a large orange and black ball suddenly launched itself at the cage. The stoic redhead stumbled back a few paces, and Suna Junin who were standing next to the cage quickly moved to detach the parasite clinging to their leader. But Gaara held them off with a raised hand. The same raised hand rose to pat the mop of messy, spiky blonde hair. Uzumaki Kame Naruto. Naruto smiled and hopped onto her own feet. Gaara's lips twitched up at the corners in reply, and those near enough to see it were shocked. The cage never smiled at anyone other than his siblings, and even that was rare. Welcome, Kame. You know, Gaara, apart from Tsunade Obachan you're the only one who calls me that. Naruto grinned at her friend. Those who had met the cheerful blonde just rolled their eyes mentally at her less than respectful way of addressing her own cage and theirs, while those Junin who had yet to be introduced to the Konoha nin had to pick their jaws off the ground. Such insubordination would have been severely punished in Suna. And most were wondering why the cage took time off his busy schedule to greet the Konoha nin at their gates instead of letting them go to his office and greet him there, which would have been a sign of respect on Konoha's side. So, Gaara, where's Kujira-sensei? And Tsunade Obachan said you said Sasayaki is ready. I can't wait. More jaws dropped as the cage chuckled lightly and started walking into the village, Naruto almost bouncing beside him. All but 4 of the Suna Junin dispersed, and the remaining 4 escorted the Konoha guests and the cage down the village streets to the blacksmith. Many people stopped what they were doing to bow respectfully to the cage and his guest. The Anbu remained hidden. Even as Naruto cheerfully returned the greetings, and chatted a little with those who remembered her from her previous mission, she couldn't help but be pleased and a little proud to see Gaara acknowledge the greetings with polite nods and even polite words when he knew the person a little better. Kujira-sensei! Shouted Naruto, waving wildly as she saw a tall, dignified gray-haired man in his 60s come out of a little shack by the side of a large house at the end of the street. Without another word, she ran off to meet the man, who had looked up and smiled when he heard the familiar voice. "Ah, the Gaki's back," he said, ruffling Naruto's hair when she reached him. She playfully swatted his hand away and pouted. "Why do most old people I know call me Gaki? I'm going to be 18 soon. I'm not a Gaki anymore." Kujira grinned and ruffled the blonde hair again, and was about to reply when the cage quietly materialized beside the Konoha kunoichi. "Cage-sama," the older man said, bowing respectfully. "Kujira dono," Gaara replied, bowing a little as well. "As you can see, Kame has rushed all the way from Konoha when she heard Sasayaki was ready." Kujira chuckled as Naruto looked hopefully at him. Yeah, it's ready. Give me a minute and I'll get it for you." He disappeared into the dark shack. Naruto looked curiously into the shack and saw 2 anvils and a fire burning brightly, as well as neatly stacked pieces of metal, and neatly arranged equipment hanging from the roof and on the walls. She could vaguely make out Kujira as he picked something off a rickety-looking shelf and came out again. "Here," Kujira said, handing the damask-wrapped long object to her. Eagerly, Naruto took the object from him and carefully undid the leather cords that kept the damask cloth wrapped around the object within. She gently removed the cloth and gasped happily. The scabbard of the katana was beautifully engraved with a swirling pattern, and the Uzumaki swirl stood out in the middle of the sheath on both its flat surfaces. The katana hilt's wrappings were her favorite orange in color, and the hilt guard, or tsuba, was in the shape of the Uzumaki swirl, and was made of what seemed to be red glass with a thin metal outer rim. In a fluid movement, she gripped the scabbard with her left hand and drew out the katana with her right. The katana was long, almost 80 centimeters in length, and made of a metal so black it gleamed, but didn't reflect much light. All the better in terms of stealth, where the smallest reflection of light could give you away. On one side of the flat of the blade was inscribed her name, Uzumaki Kame Naruto, and on the other side the name of the katana, Sasayaki. in beautiful calligraphy. She executed a few mock thrusts and swipes, getting used to the weight of the katana in her hand, then re-sheathed it and turned to Kujira. "Well?" the swordmaster asked, grinning. "Satisfied? Satisfied?" Naruto asked incredulously. "The katana is incredible. I'm beyond satisfied." Smiling widely, she glomped Kujira, katana held carefully in one hand. Although, she released her sensei and said sheepishly, "It's gonna take me a heck of a long time to pay you back, Kujira-sensei. I don't have much money, and—" "Nonsense." Kujira cut her off. He gave her a fond smile. "It's been paid for. Me and Kasage-sama went Dutch on this." Naruto's eyes widened. "Really? But it's got to be extremely expensive. It's made of chakra-conducting metal. I can't let you pay for it all. It is our gift to you, Kame," Gaara spoke up quietly. He had been enjoying Naruto's happiness at receiving the katana. "Yes. Think of it as a long overdue gift in appreciation of you rescuing and reviving the Kasage 3 years ago," Kujira said. Gaara nodded, but became puzzled as Naruto pouted. "But that was supposed to be an advanced favor from the future Hokage to the Kasage. And I didn't do much then, either. And if you pay me back the favor, how am I gonna get Gaara to do favors for me, huh?" she said childishly. Gaara almost smiled in relief. He thought he had somehow offended the blonde kunoichi. Kujira laughed outright. "In that case, think of it as a simple expression of gratitude for setting me on the right path 6 years ago, Kame. Although a mere katana could never be equivalent to the thankfulness I feel," Gaara told her. Naruto was quiet for a while, then a small, genuine smile lit her face. It was one of those smiles Gaara loved, but hardly got to see. Her smile then widened into one that almost split her face in two. "Okay, I got no problem thinking of it that way. Then you'll still owe me, the future Hokage, a favor," she said happily as she traced the patterns in the scabbard with her fingers. Gaara gave her a small smile, to which she replied with another of those beautiful, genuine smiles. "Oh yes," Kujira-sensei exclaimed. He hurried into the shack, rooted around the things on a desk, and returned with something in hand. He thrust it towards Naruto. "It's a belt with a loop to attach the katana." The blonde took the belt. It was black leather, with the red Uzumaki swirl embroidered into the center. Kujira held the katana for her as she tied it on, and adjusted it so that the Uzumaki swirl was in the center and the loop was directly above her left hip. The swordmaster instructed her on how to attach and detach the katana, and made her practice unsheathing and sheathing her Sasayaki till she could do it fluidly. "Kame," Gaara said, after watching her for a while. "I'm sorry to say that I have to leave. Kujira Dono will instruct you in your practice today. You and your escorts are invited to stay at the Kasage's offices, where rooms have been prepared for you. And I would like to take you out to dinner tonight, if you're agreeable." "Of course. Thanks, Gaara. You're the best. Say hi to Kankuro for me, will you?" Naruto gave the redhead a thumbs up. Gaara nodded to both Naruto and Kujira, and disappeared in a whirl of sand. "Alright," Kujira-sensei clapped his hands twice. "Let's see how you bond with Sasayaki." A knock sounded on her bedroom door. "Almost ready," Naruto called out. She quickly gave her hair a last brush, patted down her pale blue long-sleeved blouse and simple black silk below the knee skirt. As she retied her blue sash, the color of her eyes, she looked in the mirror to check her cherry lip gloss. It was the only bit of makeup she used, because she liked the warm color, and it kept her lips moist. Her cursed necklace, the one she won from Tsunade, hung outside her blouse for once. Satisfied, and feeling a little girly, she went to answer the door. "Konbanwa, Kame," Gaara greeted with a small smile. He was quite surprised to see a very feminine-looking Naruto standing in front of him even if it didn't show on his face. It was the first time he'd ever seen her in anything other than her usual ninja garb or casual t-shirt and baggy shorts. With a faint pink tinting his cheeks, he noted that she hadn't bound her chest this time. "Konbanwa, Gaara," she greeted cheerfully. "Let's go get dinner. I'm starved." With that, she bounced out of the room, locked the door and turned to the cage. The smile still on his face, he held out a small box wrapped in orange. A big smile lit Naruto's face. "Happy birthday in advance, Kame." Touched, Naruto took the box and unwrapped it carefully, albeit a little clumsily. Inside was an intricately carved jewelry box, and when Naruto opened it, she saw a colored bead and silver bracelet. The beads were blue, like her eyes, yellow, like her hair, orange, her favorite shade, too, and red, the Uzumaki spiral red, and were arranged in fours comprised of each color, and each group of four were separated by a tiny silver spiral and hourglass. The beads were crystal clear, and sparkled like diamonds. Naruto looked at Gaara with large, grateful eyes. The cage merely took the bracelet out of the box and fastened it on her right wrist. The beads are extremely hardened glass made from the sand in my gourd, he informed her. Naruto felt her heart clench, and gave Gaara a big hug. Thank you so much, Gaara. No one has ever given me such a birthday present before. Well, except the goggles someone left on my door for my 10th birthday. I still don't know who it was, but still, this is beautiful. She wiped some moisture that threatened to spill out of her eyes. Gaara's forehead creased a little. Are you crying, Kame? Did I upset you? Naruto laughed. No, silly. I'm so touched that you're so nice to me. Most people in Konoha ignore me on my birthday, and those that don't, well, they give me unpleasant gifts, if you get my drift. She rubbed her eyes again, and looked up to see Gaara frowning, anger in his eyes. She supposed he had got her drift, and wasn't happy about what she had just revealed about her birthday presents in Konoha, since she'd told him about the sealing occurring on the day she had been born. She sniffed and wiped her hands on her skirt, and something in the back of her mind told her that a Yame Nichan would have scolded her for doing that, so she stopped and gave Gaara a sheepish smile. I'm being such a girl, huh, Gaara? She laughed self-consciously, fidgeting with her sash, then froze slightly as Gaara offered her his arm. You are a girl, Kame. And a beautiful one, at that. Naruto laughed again, hilariously this time. Now you're really being silly, Gaara. Don't let the skirt and blouse fool you. Sakura-chan, Hinata-chan and even Temari are much prettier than I am. She took the offered arm somewhat awkwardly. It was such a girly thing to do, and she didn't particularly like girly stuff, but she didn't want to offend Gaara, who was being so nice to her. This is really great, Gaara. Naruto said happily, playing with the desert rose he had given her earlier. It was another girly thing, but she realized she liked it. Half-consciously she remembered thinking of how girls equated flowers, chocolate and jewelry with romance. Her eyes widened. In her hands were 2 out of the 3. She had a bracelet, jewelry, and was holding a desert rose, flower. Surely Gaara didn't mean, silly girl. She chided herself, and almost laughed aloud. That was such a ridiculous idea. But he did bring me to a really nice, secluded restaurant for a birthday dinner, and he listened to me rave about Sasayaki, and now we're just watching the stars from the roof of the highest building in Suna. It's practically like what Sakura-chan calls a date. Shoving the unease building up into the back of her mind, Naruto forced herself to relax and leaned back into the bench she and Gaara were sitting on. The breeze was light, making her blonde spikes ruffle in the wind. I can never thank you enough, Kame, for all that you've done for me, Gaara said softly, breaking the silence that had settled since Naruto last spoke. You pulled me out of the hell of loneliness, you helped me find a new purpose in caring for the village I thought I hated, and you literally brought me back from the dead. Ah, Gaara, we're friends, that's what friends do for each oath. Kame. Naruto turned to Gaara as he cut off what she had been saying. He looked serious, his teal eyes shone brightly in the moonlight, which lit up his blood-red hair like a flame and bathed his pale skin in an ethereal glow. The kanji, I, tattooed on his forehead stood out in stark contrast to his pale skin. Naruto felt her heart flutter just a little as she realized how handsome Gaara had become, even if those rings around his eyes never went away and his eyebrows never grew back, for some reason. If anything, they actually enhanced his looks. Kame, I have thought it over many times during the past year that you have been with me in Suna, and I have come to the conclusion, the realization, that I have feelings for you. Naruto's eyes widened and she stared into Gaara's unwavering teal eyes. Gaara gently took her hands in his, onto his lap. Uzumaki Kame Naruto, I love you. Naruto stared at him, shocked. Her mind ran over the last months of her year-long mission in Suna. How Gaara had always done his best to make time to have at least one meal a day with her even though she knew he was busy most of the time. How he wouldn't allow her to pay for her food when they went out for meals. How he had always made sure she had everything she needed, both mission-wise and personally, even though those things were her own responsibility. Most of all, she realized she wasn't imagining things when she saw his eyes harden into glares whenever she was around other men who were trying to get extra friendly with her. He really did love her, she could see it in his usually blank eyes. Gaara wasn't finished. "Kame, will you marry me?" Naruto's jaw hung loose, and she opened and closed her mouth a few times. Gaara, in love with her? Marry him? Gaara, at her tone, Gaara knew the answer, but he gripped her hands harder. He hadn't brought his gourd, but the small amount of sand that was on the rooftop swirled angrily around their feet. Gaara forced himself to calm down, and the sand slowly receded. "Uchiha Uzumaki Kame Naruto." Gaara blinked. "What?" Naruto repeated what she had said, a little sadly. "Uchiha Uzumaki Kame Naruto. I'm engaged to Uchiha Sasuke, Gaara." "I see." Gaara's tone was so quiet but so heartbroken that she held onto his hands as he tried to pull away. "It's not what you think, Gaara," Naruto said, and explained the full situation to him. To his credit, he listened carefully without interrupting. "I see," he said again when she finished. "What are your feelings for Uchiha, then?" Unconsciously, she gripped his hands harder as she looked down. "I don't know, Gaara. I really don't know. He's my friend, my rival. I trained hard to bring him back, and now he's back, and I'm the only way he can get a chance to kill Itachi, and then be free in Konoha. Right now I think of it as a mission, something I must do for my village. The Sharingan is one of Konoha's trump cards, and since I have the power, I should do everything I can to ensure it stays in Konoha." She paused for a moment, and turned her head back to look at Gaara. "I think of you as my friend, Gaara. Probably my closest, best friend. You're the only one who really understands what I've been through, what I'm going through." She took a breath. "I don't know much about love and stuff, but I think love you, Gaara, just not in that way." She gave him a watery smile. "Besides, you're the cage and I'm the future Hokage. It would be difficult if we were married, Her spirits rose a little as Gaara gave a pained, tiny smile. Instinctively, she scooted closer to the redhead and enveloped him in a tight hug, different from the friendly hugs she always gave. "I'm so sorry to break your heart, Gaara. I really wish I did feel for you like you want me to. I mean, you're the guy who treats me the nicest, much better than Sasuke Teme, and he's supposed to be my husband in 4 days." Naruto's voice cracked at the word husband. She tightened her arms around Gaara's warm body, and felt him return her hug. She relaxed in his embrace. "You're so comforting, Gaara. Wouldn't have thought you had it in you. Thinking of how you were years ago." Naruto pushed back a little and looked at him with a small grin. "I'll still love you, Kame," Gaara answered softly. Impulsively, she kissed him lightly on his tattoo. Blushing, she drew back and grinned at him. "There. You are the honored recipient of Uzumaki Kame Naruto's first kiss to be given to a guy. Although, I did kiss Sasuke Teme 6 years ago, but that was a total accident, and I didn't even want it or like it, so it doesn't count." She grinned at him again, and was happy to see him smile back a little, although his eyes still showed pain. The redhead gently brushed locks of blonde hair that shone golden under the moonlight away from the clear blue eyes. They had drooped down since Naruto wasn't wearing her Hite-8. He loved those blue eyes that always sparkled with life. Gaara let go of Naruto and stood up. Turning slightly, he offered Naruto a hand. "We should get going, Kame. You have to leave early tomorrow, anyhow." Smiling at him, she took the offered hand and pulled herself off the bench, then hooked her hand through his like she had done earlier in the evening. "I'm not marrying you, Gaara, but I'm keeping the bracelet," she said in a playful tone, as they walked back to the cage's offices in the bright moonlight. Gaara looked at her, smiling a little. "Of course, Kame. I wouldn't dream of asking it back from you. Keep it as a reminder of me." "Gaara," she said in an indignant tone, and he stopped to look at her, anxious that he had somehow offended her. "I don't need anything to remind you of me," she declared, smiling at his anxiety. "You're always here," she continued, and placed her free hand over her heart. "Thank you, Kame. It is the same for me." He kept the small smile the whole way back to her room. The sun had barely peaked above the horizon as the Suna and Konoha shinobi stood at the gates of Sanagakure no Sato. The cage stood with his back to his village, a team of Junin, Kankuro and Kujiro with him. The Konoha trio faced the Suna group. "Thanks for everything, Kage-sama. Your hospitality is much appreciated," Naruto said. "The shinobi of Konoha are always welcomed guests in Suna," the Kage replied. Naruto grinned, shrugging off the formal atmosphere. She launched herself at Kujira. Thanks so much, Kujira-sensei. I've learned so much from you, and Sasayaki is the best katana in the world. The gray-haired man laughed. Anytime, Gaki. You're always welcome in my house. He patted her head affectionately. Naruto released her Kenjutsu-sensei and hopped to Kankuro, who gave her a cheery grin, which she returned. He slapped her on the shoulder, hard, and she slapped him back just as hard. Take care, shrimp, he said. Be seeing you around, doll boy. She replied, and walked a few steps to Gaara. Well, Gaara, she said, smiling. Awkwardly but determinedly, he reached out and hugged her, to the intense surprise of the Suna nin beside him. She hugged back and then let go, then kissed his tattoo again. The Suna nin were floored, their eyes popping out of their head. I love you too, Gaara. Don't forget. You're my best friend, she whispered in his ear, and he nodded. She stepped back, then raised her right hand to touch her chest where her heart was. Gaara understood immediately, and mimicked her movements with a slight smile. Naruto broke into a huge grin, nodded to her Anbu escorts, who bowed respectfully to the cage, and waved her right hand at them. The early morning sunlight made her bracelet sparkle brightly. Then, together, the Konoha trio turned around and headed back to Konoha at a fast run. Shinobi instincts kicked in the moment she landed in the clearing with her Anbu escorts. Instead of preparing to leap back into the trees to continue on their way to Konoha, they quickly leapt back as a foreign chakra signature made itself known to them. Immediately on her guard, despite the lack of killing intent from the unknown person, she quickly hinged her face into her male form and gripped Sasayaki's hilt. Slipping into the Suna Kenjutsu stance Kujira-sensei taught her, she noted the Anbu were in taijutsu stances as well, and at the nod of the senior Anbu, she called out in a voice deeper than her real voice, "Who's there? Show yourself." Somewhat deranged chuckles were heard, and a figure wrapped in a long black hooded cloak rose fluidly out of the ground not 4 meters in front of the Konoha nins. Naruto-kun. A pleasure to meet you, the cloaked man said. Naruto narrowed her eyes, the voice was very familiar. Then a mental light bulb went off in her head. Kabuto, what do you want? She asked, half unsheathing her katana. The Anbu beside her tensed, and she could feel killing intent from them, but surprisingly, none from Kabuto so far. The traitorous medic nin raised his head so that they could see the right half of his face, but his left half was kept covered by the hood. He gave them a smile. Now, Naruto-kun, must you always be so brash? Kabuto chuckled. I come in peace. After all, we're both after the same thing. Or person, rather. What are you talking about? The blonde girl said loudly, watching the traitor warily. Why, Sasuke-sama, of course. No, I should call him Sasuke-kun now, since he did kill Orochimaru-sama after all. Naruto schooled her features to reveal no surprise at the fact that Kabuto apparently didn't know Sasuke was back in Konoha. And so? No need to be so rude, Naruto-kun. One would think that you had learned some manners by now, Get on with it, Kabuto. I don't have time for this. Where's Sasuke if he's not with Orochimaru? And how could he have killed that Habi-Yuru? He's not that strong. Naruto bluffed. Kabuto chuckled his deranged chuckle again and pushed his glasses further up his nose. It's true, Naruto-kun. Sasuke-kun killed Orochimaru-sama when he was at his weakest, at the exact moment he began the body transfer. As to where Sasuke-kun is now, I'm afraid I have only a vague idea. Rumor has it that he fought Uchiha Itachi at the Suna-Konoha border. I'm making my way there to investigate the scene of the crime, so to speak. And why are you telling me all this? What do you want with me? Asked Naruto as she glared at the gray-haired man. The mad glint in his eyes sent a shiver down her spine. Kabuto slowly reached for something behind his back under his cloak, and the Konoha trio quickly tensed. Naruto pulled out Sasayaki and held it in a defensive position, and the Anbu members pulled out their own katana. Kabuto merely tossed a black book at them. What's that? Naruto didn't relax her guard. A copy of Orochimaru-sama's compiled information on Akatsuki. His little black book, you might say. And why are you giving this to us? Well, Naruto-kun, as you probably know, Orochimaru-sama was once a member of Akatsuki, and when he left, they weren't too happy about it, and had been giving him quite a bit of trouble. And so? Naruto asked stupidly, although she could already understand what Kabuto was insinuating. It never hurt to mislead your enemies into thinking you were stupider than you actually were. Kabuto bought the act, and sighed. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, Naruto-kun. This information will help Konoha, and Suna, if your Hokage wishes to share the information, to be better prepared in facing the Akatsuki. It might not lead you to them, but Orochimaru-sama did note down the favored jutsu of each user, their fighting styles, their quirks, and other relevant information. Oh, Naruto said, and keeping to the "I'm Naruto the idiot" act, shouted, "Don't call me your friend." Kabuto sighed in exasperation at her apparent stupidity. "Naruto-kun," he said, "you should actually consider being my friend. After all, I will be powerful someday soon." "What are you talking about, Kabuto?" For an answer, Kabuto flung off his hood, and Naruto had to fight the urge to recoil in disgust. Kabuto's left eye had been surgically replaced with one having a yellow pupil with a black slit in the center. It was Orochimaru's eye, and the skin on the left half of his face, especially around the transplanted eye, had taken on a scaly quality. The medic Nin gave them a freaky smile, which was made worse by the sight of Orochimaru's eye. "Only one eye," he said almost giddily, "and already I can feel the power flowing through me, trying to overtake my consciousness. You and I are similar, Naruto-kun. Are you Uzumaki Naruto, or are you the Kyuubi no Kitsune? I am faced with this problem myself, having led different lives, and I find myself wondering who the real Yakushi Kabuto is. You are trying to find yourself by aiming to become the Hokage. I will be the most powerful. I will subdue this power of Orochimaru-sama's and bend it to my will, and I will be the most powerful." Naruto shot him a look of disgust. "You're crazy, Kabuto. Orochimaru's eye has screwed up your mind, like the curse seal did to Sasuke." Kabuto laughed, a sound that reminded Naruto of Orochimaru. "Kukuku, Naruto-kun. It's merely a matter of perception. I will be strong, because I will subdue this power. Think over my offer, Naruto-kun. The enemy of my enemy is my friend." Naruto didn't reply, but held Sasayaki in an attacking stance. Kabuto shook his head, but something caught his attention, and he stared intently at Naruto. "Something is different about you, Naruto-kun. What are you talking about?" yelled Naruto, frantically hoping he didn't see through her henge. Kabuto considered her critically. "I can't seem to lay my finger on it," he murmured to himself, but something is not right with him. He shook himself and smiled his freaky smile at the Konoha trio. "Until we meet again, Naruto-kun." Saying that, he dissolved into the ground, leaving only the black book as evidence of him having been there. Naruto sheathed her katana and walked forward to retrieve the book, but the Anbu on her right held out his hand. "One moment, Uzumaki-san, while we make sure it's not a trap." He nodded to his partner, who flashed through some hand seals, and then kept his hands in the ram seal for a minute before nodding. "Clear. You have to teach me that," murmured Naruto, impressed by the usefulness of the jutsu. She stepped forward and bent down to pick up the book. It wasn't very thick, probably about 30 pages or so. She quickly put the book into her bag amidst the clothes she had worn last night that Gaara had given her, and nodded to the Anbu as she zipped up her bag. Nodding back to her, the trio quickly continued on their way to Konoha, but kept alert as they leapt through the trees. Naruto dropped her henge as the gates of Konoha came into view. She sighed in resignation, knowing that she couldn't hide behind the henge anymore. She couldn't really blame the council on this point. After all, she couldn't masquerade as a male for the rest of her life, although she was really tempted to. It was the all-explaining she knew she would have to do that made her less than enthusiastic about remaining a girl. Unconsciously, her left hand played with the beads of the bracelet she wore under her fingerless glove on her right hand. Steeling herself, she dropped down from the trees with the Anbu and walked up to the gates, and nodded to the Chunin on gate duty. As soon as they entered the village, the three jumped up to the nearest roof and made their way to the Hokage Tower. All their way to the Hokage Tower, and right up to the door of the Hokage's office, they didn't meet anyone Naruto knew well, for which she was grateful. They were probably at home, like the rest of the village, preparing for the annual festival that celebrated the defeat of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Just thinking of that made her stomach twist, and left a sour taste in her mouth. She hated those festivals, where the villagers would treat her extra viciously, knowing that she wouldn't retaliate or report them. She was thankful, though, that most of the villagers had become more receptive of her as a person. More people had come to the realization that she was not the Kyuubi. However, there were still those stubborn ones who took out their grief at losing their loved ones 18 years ago on her, and insisted on believing that she was the Kyuubi. She sneered mentally. They never realized that if she really was the Kyuubi, they'd have long been dead. Her 17th birthday had been her best so far, because she had spent it with Gaara and her new friends in Suna, and they had thrown a birthday party for her, her first ever. She had cried a few tears when they surprised her with the cake. Pushing the unpleasant memories of birthdays in Konoha to the back of her mind and marching up to the door, she threw it open with a shout of "Tsunade Obachan," and expertly dodged the pen thrown at her. It was caught by the junior Anbu of her 2 escorts. "I'm home," she sing-songed obnoxiously, grinning at the tired-looking Tsunade, whose desk was covered with papers. "About time, brat," Tsunade snapped, not particularly playfully. Naruto carefully held her katana and dropped into one of the chairs opposite Tsunade. The Anbu remained standing. "Tsunade-sama," the senior Anbu member said, "we have something pertinent to report. We had a confrontation with Yakushi Kabuto." The man continued to give the specifics of the event. Distance from Konoha, time, matters discussed, description of Kabuto and even the duration of the confrontation as the Hokage listened with a displeased expression. Naruto was impressed with his memory, and contributed to the report from time to time. "Su-ka," Tsunade mused, steepling her fingers on her desk as she leaned forward. "Kame, the black book?" Naruto nodded and dug into her bag to produce the item, and handed it over to Tsunade. The older blonde took it and cursorily flipped through it, her frown becoming deeper and deeper the more pages she glanced at. Finally, she tossed the book at the senior Anbu member behind Naruto. "Give it to the Anbu Defense Tactics Unit head, and tell her I want a full report on each Akatsuki member, as well as suggested defenses and Konoha Akatsuki matchup suggestions in case we decide to send Konoha Nin after Akatsuki," ordered the Hokage. "Anything else to report?" Hokage-sama. I'll see to it the DTU head receives your instructions." "Good job. I'll expect a detailed report by noon tomorrow." "Dismissed," said Tsunade, and the two bowed smartly and went out the door. Tsunade turned her attention to Naruto. "What do you make of it?" "He didn't reveal much about his intentions," Naruto said shrewdly. "He's using us in a sense. He wants us to start eliminating Akatsuki, but he didn't say why. Instead he spouted the stuff about enemies and friends." Tsunade nodded, inwardly pleased with another instance of Naruto showing that she wasn't a complete idiot. "Go on. He's after Sasuke. He was apparently much attached to Orochimaru, for some reason or another, and he wants to avenge the Habi-Yuru's death." "Just what we need. An Avenger going after our own little Avenger boy," Naruto said, and gave an exaggerated groan. Tsunade rolled her eyes. "We'll have to inform Sasuke that Kabuto's lurking around," continued Naruto, and Tsunade nodded. "Speaking of Sasuke, I just want to remind you that your wedding is tomorrow at twilight. Ayame, Hana and Hinata will assist you with the wedding kimono." "Nani? Wedding kimono?" screeched Naruto. "I thought all we had to do was sign some papers. No one said anything about a wedding kimono." Tsunade smirked in amusement at her. "You will be dressed up, Kame. Don't worry, though. It's a simpler version of the real thing, and it has your new clan symbol embroidered on it. Oh, and by the way, I took the liberty of getting Ayame to go through your clothes in your apartment, and the Uzumaki spiral on every single piece of clothing you own has been replaced with the Uchiha Uzumaki clan symbol." "Nani?" Naruto jumped up and pointed at Tsunade angrily. "How could you do that?" "Oh," asked Tsunade, feigning misunderstanding. "It was easy. You hardly keep the place locked up properly. It was so easy for me to break the lock. Just a flick of the wrist, really, and we were in your apartment. Took Ayame quite a while to search through your clothes, though." Naruto was twitching all over and red in the face. Balling her fists, she shouted, "Arg!" and dropped into her chair, crossing her arms over her chest and pouting sulkily. Tsunade grinned at her. "Be at Iruka's house by 4 p.m. tomorrow. The girls will meet you there." "HN," was Naruto's sulky reply. Tsunade smirked. "You sounded just like your husband-to-be." Naruto glared at her, and stuck her tongue out before going back to her sulky pose. Tsunade chuckled, entertained by Naruto's antics. She felt refreshed just by the girl's presence after a long day of troublesome paperwork. Deciding to wipe the sulk off her face, she asked, "So how was Suna?" Naruto instantly became animated. "Suna was great," she exclaimed, hands flaying around. "Kujira-sensei got me this awesome katana that channels chakra. Here she lifted Sasayaki for Tsunade's inspection, and I don't have to pay a thing. Kujira-sensei and Gaara paid for everything. Kujira-sensei even got me a belt to tie Sasayaki to. And both Sasayaki and the belt have the Uzumaki spiral, and you can't do anything about it. BLPPPHHTT. She blew Tsunade a raspberry. Tsunade, meanwhile, was examining the katana carefully, noting the obviously expertly forged blade, the beautiful calligraphy on it, and the red glass Uzumaki spiral that served as the hilt guard. She ran her fingers over the carefully carved spiral pattern of the scabbard. It was definitely an expensive weapon, made with much care. It's a beautiful weapon. Deadly and beautiful. Gaara and your sensei paid for everything, you say? Murmured Tsunade. She noticed Naruto's expression turning serious, so she sheathed the katana and handed it back to its owner, who carefully rested it on her lap, then pulled off her right glove. Tsunade immediately noticed the bead bracelet that sparkled in the lights of her office. Naruto unclasped the bracelet and handed it over to Tsunade, who could guess the significance of the bead colors right away. Gaara gave it to me as a birthday present, Naruto informed her. He said the beads are glass, made from the sand in his gourd. Tsunade's eyebrows shot up. The sand in his gourd? Isn't that something very dear to him? Kame, do you understand the significance of this? He asked me to marry him, Naruto cut in quietly, looking away. Tsunade was shocked. He said he loved me, and he asked me to marry him. The Hokage swallowed heavily as she returned the bracelet to Naruto, who fastened it around her right wrist and pulled her glove on over it. "And your reply?" she asked slowly. "I turned him down, Tsunade Obachan. I told him I didn't have feelings for him in that way. I love him, but only as my best friend." Naruto looked up, her eyes tearing slightly. "It broke his heart, I could see that clearly. I told him everything about the council's plan and Sasuke." Tsunade was still trying to wrap her mind around the news. It would never have worked, anyway. Politically, I mean. The Cage and the future Hokage, don't see that happening, Naruto continued, a small, sad smile on her face. He understands. That's what I love about Gaara. He understands me so well, and I understand him so well. I don't think it could be that way with Sasuke, huh? The last part was whispered, and Tsunade almost didn't catch it. Her heart clenched at the obvious distress of the girl in front of her. He was so sweet that night. He took me to dinner in a really nice restaurant, the kind that would probably not allow me in Konoha, and gave me a desert rose. Then we went to the roof of the tallest building in Suna and watched the stars. And then he proposed. Naruto smiled distantly at the memory. And it struck Tsunade. It was like a daughter telling her mother about her first date. Tsunade's heart clenched even more at the realization that Naruto probably didn't have anyone to tell these kind of stories to ask for mother-daughter dating advice. Funny, isn't it, Tsunade Obachan? I decide to agree to the council's marriage plan, and then I get an honest, heartfelt proposal from someone who actually cares. Kinda overwhelming, you know? And to think that before this I never gave a second thought to marriage, knowing that no one would want me, Naruto said somewhat bitterly. She rubbed away the tears that were threatening to fall. This is what I hate about releasing the henge. I get all girly and cry so easily. She smiled weakly at Tsunade, who got up from her chair, walked around her paper-cluttered desk and lifted Naruto into a gentle, comforting hug. "It's okay to cry, Kame," she murmured, stroking the blonde hair under her chin. Naruto clung to Tsunade pathetically. Her shoulders shook soundlessly for a few moments, but she didn't cry. "Thanks, Tsunade Obachan. You're so good to me," Naruto said softly. "Don't worry, though. Uzumaki Naruto never goes back on her word, that's my Nindo. I'll marry Sasuke as a mission to keep the Sharingan in Konoha, although I don't know if I could actually produce babies." Tsunade released Naruto and leaned back on the edge of her desk. "I know you'll do your best, Kame. And you know I don't give a damn about the babies. But you'd better make sure you stay safe, okay? You can talk to me about anything, you hear? My door is always open to you." "Hey, I'd kick it open even if it wasn't," grinned Naruto. Tsunade was glad to see her getting back her spirit, but she had to ask. If you didn't have to marry Sasuke, would you have married the Kage? She queried softly. Naruto looked away for a moment, then looked Tsunade in the eye. I did think about that, Tsunade Obachan. It was really tempting, and I think I could fall in love with him after we got married. And I think that I'd be happy even if I didn't love him that way in return, Naruto replied, and took a breath. But the answer would still have been a no. I don't love Gaara that way. He's my closest, best friend. And the future Hokage can't marry the Kage anyway. How'd I be Hokage then? She grinned. By that answer, Tsunade could see Naruto's obvious want for affection, the want to belong, to love someone, to have someone love her. To have a family. She could also see that self-sacrificing spirit that Naruto had, and her love for Konoha, and for Uchiha. Whether it was romantic love or brotherly love, she couldn't tell. And Naruto herself was obviously not too sure about it either. This was confirmation of the appropriateness of Tsunade's decision to appoint Naruto the Rokudame after her. Her mind had been made up a long time ago, from the time she first met the girl, and this just affirmed her convictions that Naruto was the right person for the job. Someone who could lay aside personal interests for the sake of the village. Just as Sarutobi-sensei had told her a long time ago, the name Hokage was a promise to die to protect the leaf. She hoped fervently that it wouldn't have to come to that for Naruto, but she knew that if it did come to that, Naruto would be more than willing. She sighed loudly as she glanced at the clock. It was almost 8 in the evening, nearly time for her to officiate the festival. Grimacing, she turned to Naruto. Kame, I've to go to the festival soon. Naruto's face fell for a second, before she forced herself to smile. Right, she said a tad too cheerfully. Tsunade winced. I need to go, anyways. Kinda tired after almost 3 days of traveling. See you tomorrow, Obachan. Naruto tied Sasayaki to her belt, then gave Tsunade a wave with obviously forced cheerfulness. She turned and moved to go out the door. Kame, Tsunade called out. Naruto turned slowly. Yeah? Tsunade smiled fondly. Happy birthday. Sarutobi-sensei would have been proud of you. Your father and mother would have been proud, too. I'm sure they are. Jiraiya and I are proud of you too. Naruto's head dropped, and her hair hid her face from Tsunade's view. She was gripping her katana hard with her right hand, and her left hand was balled into a tight fist. After a few moments, she raised her head, and Tsunade could see her beautiful blue eyes shining with unshed tears. Thank you, she whispered, and disappeared out the door. Naruto watched the remnants of the festival from her favorite spot in Konoha, on the stone head of the Yondaime Hokage. She did this every year that she was in Konoha during the festival. The Yondaime was her hero, even though he did seal the Kyuubi into her, and thus made her life hell. Well, the hell was becoming better and better as she made more friends to add to her list of precious people. Besides, she understood that he had to do what he had done in order to save the village. But she often wondered what was it that made him choose her. Better her than someone else, she supposed. Cerulean blue eyes gazed out over the village she loved. She always felt at peace on the Yondaime's head, for reasons she couldn't explain. Looking at the blinking lights of buildings and lanterns, she believed she could identify with the Yondaime's love for Konoha, that he would be willing to lay down his life for the people he protected. Her thoughts drifted. What changes she wanted to make when she became Hokage. She wanted to beef up the Shinobi Academy curriculum, and find a way to upgrade security at Konoha's perimeters. No way she wanted people like Itachi and Kisame sneaking in like they did 6 years ago. Her plans to forge more alliances. She was thinking of Kiri. Perhaps Wave Country could put in a good word? And finally, her thoughts turned toward her marriage mission, as she preferred to think of it. Now, as she thought more of having to be married to Sasuke, Gaara's proposal became more and more appealing. Gaara's feelings towards her were real. Sasuke called her his best friend right before trying to kill him, then plunged a Chidori in her chest. The scar, though faded, wouldn't go away, for some reason, and almost killed her again. The final time, it had taken Kabuto and Orochimaru to sway him from his whim. She shuddered with repulsion at the thought that she actually owed her life to them. Sasuke would never think of her in any other way than as Itachi bait, she could tell. She knew it, from the calculating look in his eye that she had caught when he was presented with the council's idea. She was very disappointed, and sad, that Sasuke had not a drop of affection for her. Of course, she wasn't expecting him to declare his undying love for her. The very idea was so ridiculous she almost burst out laughing. But it hurt that he didn't regard her as a friend, even. And she had trained so hard to make sure she was strong enough to bring him back. Well, it turned out he didn't need her, after all. He had killed Orochimaru, and had almost killed Itachi. He was strong enough on his own, he didn't need her. He just saw her, marriage to her, as a shortcut to obtaining what he wanted. And it hurt. Naruto rubbed hard at her eyes. Kami-sama, I'm starting to cry like a girl. I hate getting all soft and emotional like this. It's bad enough that Sasuke thinks I'm weak. I don't need to go around crying about feelings and proving to him that I'm weak. Breathing deeply a few times, she opened her eyes and noticed that many of the lights were out, and Konoha was almost in total darkness. The festival is over, she thought. Safe for me to go home, then. Bringing her left hand to her chin in a half-ram seal, she shunshin-ed to the bottom of the Hokage monument. Turning back to look at the Yondaime's face, she lifted her hand and made a motion as if to grasp at his face. Look over me. I'll make you proud. She let her hand stay that way for a second, then dropped it at her side and quietly made her way back to her apartment. As she trudged along the streets with her hands in her pockets, she imagined feeling a pair of eyes on her back, following her as she walked. Quickly, she spread her senses, but didn't find anyone suspicious. There were too many people in the houses lining the street she was in for her to eliminate in order to narrow down the suspects, so she just chalked up the feeling to her imagination. But the prickling at the back of her neck didn't go away. More wary now, she continued at a faster pace than before, though she kept her gaze down on the road. She could feel a group of weak chakra signatures nearby. Probably civilians going home after the festival, she reasoned. Hopefully it wasn't. Yar yar. If it isn't the Kyuubi no Yukai itself, growled a menacing voice. Naruto squeezed her eyes shut for a second, then lifted her face to look at the person who spoke. A beefy man blocked was leaning against the wall corner that led into a dark alley. Directly in front of her were a group of about 8 men, some holding broken beer bottles, large pieces of wood, or metal pipes. Naruto sighed in resignation. It was basically the same group that would search her out and beat her up almost every year. She managed to avoid them on her 9th and 12th birthday, as well as during the time she hadn't been in Konoha, but she quickly realized that it meant the next year's beatings would get worse. And some of the men tried to force themselves onto her, too, not caring that she had been in her male form at those times. When she was young, they'd let her go with just beatings and kicks, but when she came back to Konoha in time for her 15th birthday after her 2.5-year training trip with Ero Sennin, they'd try to molest her, too. She was eternally thankful she'd gotten Ero Sennin to teach her a simple genjutsu that she'd cast to make them think they were having their way with her, even though it thoroughly repulsed her. It was a genjutsu simple enough that she could do it flawlessly even though she sucked at genjutsu. She ignored the taunts and angry curses of the men as they beat her up. She didn't retaliate. She knew their grief was real, and that grief could turn into hatred and anger. Sasuke more than proved that. If she was the outlet for their grief, then so be it. Better her getting the brunt of their frustration than some innocent civilian. The blonde bit her lip to stop from crying out at the pain. She had learnt that crying or screaming would only encourage her attackers. They'd used weapons this time. Probably since they couldn't vent their anger last year since she had been in Suna. Thinking of Suna made her think of Gaara, of her surprise birthday party last year. Of how happy she'd been. Of how wonderful Gaara was to her. Of her birthday present from him this year. She clung desperately to those pleasant memories amidst the hail of punches, beatings, kicks, and even urine as some of the men relieved themselves on her. Through it all, the sensation of being watched stayed with her, and she was sure it wasn't coming from the men beating her up. Out of the corner of a painfully swollen eye, she noticed that the leader, the beefy man who'd accosted her, was popping a tent in his crotch, and was massaging it. It was her cue to start the genjutsu. Painfully, she drew up her bruised and bleeding arms to her chest and ran through a few hand seals, and whispered the name of the genjutsu. Immediately, the rain of attacks stopped, and her attackers crashed to the ground around her. One even fell across her legs. Wincing all the way, and biting her already bleeding lip, she kicked him off and pushed herself to her knees, and almost cried out at the pain. Forcing herself to ignore the throbbing, aches and stinging sensations shooting throughout her body, she dragged herself to her feet, and slowly started in the direction of her apartment, spitting out blood every now and then. Naruto reached her apartment after a tortuous climb up the stairs of her apartment building. Most of the time she loved having an apartment on the highest floor, because of the view, but right now it sucked, having to drag herself up the stairs, leaning on the wall nearly all the way. She tiredly fished the keys out of her pants pocket, unlocked the door, and relocked it behind her. She trudged to her bed and took off her jacket, grimacing in pain as the material dragged over her bleeding wounds and throbbing bruises. She sat down on the bed and stretched out carefully, trying to find a position that minimized the pain. Already she could feel the Kyuubi's chakra starting to heal the smaller cuts and bumps. It was probably healing the larger wounds too, although those always took a longer time. At least they didn't break her bones. She always wondered why, but never stopped to ask them. She was stinking and bleeding, and probably had wood and glass splinters in her hair and skin, but she was too tired and in too much pain to care about how her sheets would be dirtied. She'd just wash them tomorrow. Closing her swollen and bruised eyes rather painfully, she allowed the numbness of sleep to overtake her senses. But she couldn't get rid of the feeling of being watched through her window. Iruka arrived home from his job at the missions room to find that Naruto had not arrived, and Hinata was on the verge of going out to look for her. "It's been almost an hour," worried Ayame. Iruka frowned. "Naruto is never late, which is why we're worried," Hinata said quietly. She'd gotten over her stutter and blushed less. Naruto had helped her with that as they trained together, sometimes with Neji. Iruka frowned again, and rubbed the scar on the bridge of his nose. His wife, Ayame, the daughter of Tuchi the owner of Ichiraku Ramen, bit her lip. "I hope nothing happened to her, seeing as yesterday was," she trailed off nervously. "Yesterday?" asked Inuzuka Hana, Kiba's older sister. "What's the significance of yesterday?" Iruka's eyes widened a little. "The festival. I hope no one got to her." Hana swore under her breath. "I forgot about her birthday." The brown-haired man made his way to the door, saying, "I'll go look for her." Halfway across the hall, though, a loud knock sounded on the door. Iruka rushed to the door and yanked it open to show a sheepish Naruto standing there in a simple loose long-sleeved orange t-shirt and gray long pants. "Sorry I'm late," she said. "Got carried away doing laundry." Which was true. She'd been washing her bloodied sheets and clothes. She had woken up at noon, sore all over, and had to take a long bathe to get rid of the stench that seemed to stick to her skin, and then she had done her laundry. Iruka placed a hand on her shoulder and pulled her in, shutting the door behind her. He didn't notice her wince at his grasp. "You made us worried, Naruto. How could you forget about something as important as this?" he chided her. She just laughed sheepishly, murmuring, "Sumimasen, sensei." Ayame and Hana latched onto her and propelled her into the spare bedroom in the house, dragged Hinata in, and kicked Iruka out when he tried to make sure Naruto was alright. They locked the door the moment they tried to enter again. "Change into this, Naruto-kun," Hinata said, holding up a bundle of white and orange cloth. She handed the white cloth to Naruto first. Taking it from the Hyuga, the blonde found it was a white under kimono. She grimaced a little, not being overly fond of women's kimonos. Biting her lip, she draped the under kimono over Hinata's head, making her splutter and Hana laugh, and shucked off her t-shirt and pants. She was used to being naked with other boys when she had been a boy, so she hadn't any qualms about undressing in front of girls. "What's the matter, Hinata-chan?" she teased when she noticed her friend blushing. "You have everything I have." Hana laughed again. Ayame caught sight of something sparkling brilliantly on Naruto's wrist. "Wow," she exclaimed. "That is a beautiful bracelet, Naruto." The other girls oohed and awed at it, and Hana caught Naruto's wrist and dragged her closer to examine the bracelet. "My best friend gave it to me for my birthday," she explained, a small, fond smile on her face. Hinata noticed something else on the Naruto's arms. And it seemed they weren't only on the arms. She quickly dispelled the weak genjutsu covering them. "Naruto, are those bruises? And scabs?" she asked, coming closer to the blonde, who was dressed in only her bra and panties. Naruto quickly moved away from the woman. "They're nothing, really, Hinata-chan," she said quickly. A little too quickly, it seemed, because Hana frowned and pulled her even nearer. "Those are fresh, Naruto. Even for someone who heals as fast as you, I can tell they're fresh wounds." "What happened?" she asked, gripping the blonde's shoulder to prevent her from moving away, then quickly releasing her grasp as Naruto winced. Hana noticed bruises and scabs along her arms as well. "They're nothing. Nothing happened," she insisted, grabbing the under kimono from Hinata and putting it on quickly. She sat on the bed as she clumsily tried to arrange the folds of the cloth. "Naruto-kun," Hinata gasped, "your scalp has traces of dried blood." Naruto frowned, and the girls came closer to inspect it, similar frowns on their faces. The blonde ran a hand through her hair and winced. "I thought I had washed out all the blood," she muttered. Hana narrowed her eyes. "Naruto, what's the meaning of this? And don't try to tell us it's nothing." Naruto kept quiet and looked away. Hinata sat beside her on the bed and put a hand on her shoulder. "Naruto-kun?" Naruto sighed. "It's nothing, really. It's just something that happens every year, and it'll heal. I've forgotten about it already." She looked up. "Can we please get on with the dressing? I was already an hour late." Hana growled. "Some people beat you up last night, didn't they? Because of the Kyuubi?" Naruto took the orange cloth from Hinata and shook it out. It was a beautiful kimono that started out in her favorite bright shade of orange at the top, and slowly faded into a creamy peach color by the waist, and white at the lower hem. A continuous cloud-like pattern was embroidered in gold thread from lower bust to mid-thigh. On the back and over the left breast was embroidered a symbol Naruto recognized as a modified Uchiha fan. The original shape of the fan had been retained, but it was now all white in color, and in the middle of the line dividing the two halves of the Uchiha fan was the red Uzumaki spiral. Together, they represented the new Uchiha Uzumaki name. The red of the Uzumaki spiral contrasted well with the white of the Uchiha fan, which in turn stood out on the bright orange of the cloth where the symbol had been stitched. "Yes to both questions, Hana-ni-chan," she muttered, and then continued, disregarding the earlier conversation, "at least the kimono is orange. I was so afraid they'd stick me in pink. Can you imagine? Pink?" She shuddered, not noticing the look Hana shot Ayame, who quietly slipped out of the room. "All right, Naruto, put it on quickly, then we can work on your makeup and hair," Hana instructed briskly, ignoring Naruto's screeching about having to use makeup. The blonde grumbled the whole way through as the girls arranged the folds of the kimono, tied on the obi and started on her hair and makeup. They didn't bring up the issue of her injuries again, though she did notice that they were being extra gentle with her. She thought they had understood her obvious reluctance to discuss the subject. She had noticed Ayame returning to the room with a half-satisfied, half-worried look on her face. The woman just explained that she went to check on Iruka when Naruto questioned her reappearance. Finally, an hour and 15 minutes later, after much protest and grumbling, from Naruto, irritated exclamations, Ayame, threats, Hana, and exasperated sighs, Hinata. The bride was finally ready. The other three girls stood back to admire their handiwork. "You look beautiful, Naruto," gushed Ayame, wringing her hands in front of her chest. Hana had a big grin on her face, and Hinata was smiling sweetly. "I'm a shinobi, I don't do beautiful," Naruto grumbled as she looked away, a slight smile on her face and faint pink on her cheeks. "You are beautiful, Naruto-kun," Hinata stated quietly, and stepped forward to take her friend's hands in hers. "I really hope you'll be happy with Sasuke," she whispered into Naruto's ears. Naruto's heart clenched, but she turned to Hinata with a smile plastered on her face. "It's a mission, and I will do my best for the mission. Feelings and girly desires for affection will not interfere with my mission." "Thanks, Hinata-chan," she whispered. Hana slapped her on the back. "Don't see what you see in that boy, but I wish you all the best, she said jovially. She also received a plastered-on smile. Ayame steered her out of the room and into the hallway, where there was a full-length mirror. "Have a look at yourself, Naruto," she said with a smile. Naruto almost didn't recognize the figure reflected in the glass if it wasn't for the bright yellow hair, cerulean blue eyes and whisker marks on the cheeks. She had insisted they not cover those up, to remind the council and Sasuke exactly who she was. She wasn't some girl off the street, or a random kunoichi. She was Uzumaki Kame Naruto, vessel of the Kyuubi no Kitsune and future Hokage of Konoha. The figure in the mirror had her yellow hair done up in an elaborate bun behind her head that Naruto could feel rather than see. A few yellow strands of hair hung down to frame her face gently. They hadn't used too much foundation or powder, so her light tan was still visible. Her lips were red, a deep, sensuous red that suited her light tan coloration well. The kimono was simple, a thing for which she was very thankful. It wasn't as elaborate as Ayame Nichan's had been during her and Iruka-sensei's wedding. The orange of the kimono suited her well, and she quite liked the way the color faded to white at the bottom. Her new name symbol, it wasn't quite a clan yet, so she refused to call it a clan symbol, stood out on her chest, right over her heart. Bringing up her right hand, she delicately traced the outlines of the fan and the red spiral with 3 fingers. The girls were quiet behind her. Ayame put her hands on Naruto's shoulders from behind. "See, Naruto? You're pretty. I wish you a happy marriage as well." The brunette smiled at the reflection. "Where's Iruka-sensei?" Naruto asked after an awkward moment, on her part, at least, wanting to get off the subject. "Oh, he went to see Hokage-sama about yo." Ayame cut herself off, and slapped a hand over her mouth. Naruto narrowed her eyes at Ayame's reflection in the mirror, becoming suspicious at the way she'd clammed up. Why did Iruka-sensei need to go see Tsunade Obachan now? Wouldn't he be seeing her later at the wedding? Then it clicked. Naruto spun around. "He went to tell Tsunade Obachan about my bruises, didn't he?" "You told him and he went to tell her," she accused. Ayame tried to say something, but Naruto continued. "I told you it was nothing, it's all healed already. I can take care of myself. Just because I'm a girl now doesn't make me weak." "Naruto-kun," Hinata started. "Naruto," Hana said. Naruto scowled angrily at them, and without another word, Shunshin ed away. "Give me one good reason I shouldn't just string you up by your intestines right now," growled a thoroughly mad Tsunade from her desk. Her killing intent flooded her office, joining the atmosphere already thickened by Jiraiya's, Iruka's and 2 full Anbu squads' killing intent. The 9 men tied up on the floor in front of her cowered, and some began to wet themselves. Iruka had rushed in 1.5 hours earlier, fuming and looking ready to kill someone. The only time Tsunade had seen him like that was when Naruto had been brought in almost dead by Kakashi after her fight with Sasuke at the Valley of the End. He had blurted out how his wife, Hana and Hinata had found multiple fresh injuries on Naruto, and how he suspected she'd received them last night, and why she'd been beaten up, based on yesterday's date. Tsunade had gone pale with fury, and had dispatched 2 Anbu squads, one under Yamato, and another under Neji, a new captain, to find the guilty men, and gotten a messenger to round up Jiraiya at the onsen. They had dragged in the 9 men about 15 minutes ago, finding them easily because they had been boasting about giving the Kyuubi what he deserved. Cowards that were, they had broken down after only 10 minutes of questioning by the Sannin, the Anbu captains, and a furious academy sensei. Tsunade had to admit Iruka had been very intimidating, probably from his experience dealing with chibi ninjas to be. "I should just turn you into a bloody stain on the floor," she shouted, standing to tower over her desk. "For 12 years you've been beating up the hero of Konoha, the legacy of the Yondaime, and the future Hokage. You've been torturing the one person I consider to be like a younger sister." She punched her table and a loud crack was heard as a corner of the wood broke off and fell to the floor. Forgive us, Hokage-sama. We beg your mercy," cried one of the men, and the others nodded furiously in agreement. Tsunade snorted. "Did you show any mercy to Naruto?" asked Jiraiya coldly. "Why should we show any mercy to you?" At that, almost all of the men began to wail for mercy. Tsunade massaged her temples. She was very tempted to smash her foot in their faces and grind down hard, and she could tell Jiraiya, Yamato, Neji and Iruka were itching to do damage as well after they'd heard how Naruto had been attacked every October 10th that she'd been in Konoha. Tsunade felt sick to her stomach. Naruto had probably been beaten up only hours after she left her office last night. "I'm not inclined to forgive you assholes," she hissed, and the men began to wail louder. "Silence," she shouted. "Did you know that today is her wedding day?" she continued, her voice tight. "I'm not going to show any mercy. In fact, since you've broken the Sandame's rule, you should know the punishment that breaking his rule entails. As such, I'm going to sentence you to Dia. Tsunade Obachan," came a shout as the door to her office burst open. The Hokage looked up to see a dressed-up figure in orange fly into the room and stop in front of her. "Kame? Naruto? What are you doing here?" Tsunade asked, her anger dissipating somewhat. Ignoring dazed exclamations about her gender by the men on the floor, the younger blonde turned to Iruka. "Iruka-sensei, why do you have to tell Tsunade Obachan?" she said angrily. Iruka frowned at her. "These men have been abusing you for years, Naruto. It's about time someone did something about it. I would have reported it to the Hokage years ago if I had known." Iruka said vehemently. "I'm not a weakling, Iruka-sensei," shouted Naruto. "I can take care of myself." "By getting beat up?" questioned Jiraiya in a cold tone. Naruto turned to him. "Yes, by getting beat up," she said in a low but intense tone. "Because, if they release their frustrations on me, then they won't go beating up someone who might actually die because of what they do." Jiraiya swallowed thickly and turned away from Naruto's intense gaze. Tsunade's voice caught in her throat, and tears started to form in her eyes. Naruto was self-sacrificing, but this was too much. "That may be true, Naruto, but you could have reported it to the Hokage yourself and let the law handle them," one of the Anbu spoke up. Naruto recognized Yamato Taiko's voice. "I know the Sandame's rule, Yamato Taiko, and I know what the punishment for breaking it is. I can't allow someone to die because they're grieved over losing their precious people to the Kyuubi's attack. How will their families live, then, if their breadwinners are executed?" Naruto said in a calmer tone. She had drawn herself up, and was standing straight as she looked Yamato in the eye. Or rather, in the eyeholes of his mask. Iruka couldn't help but note how Naruto seemed to radiate authority and compassion even as she stood arguing for the people who abused her. The fancy hairdo, makeup and feminine kimono didn't detract from the obvious charisma she overflowed with. Iruka had never seen her like this, not during the academy, and not during the time after she returned from her training trip with Jiraiya-sama. He had never seen her talk calmly and seriously like this before either. He wondered what else Naruto was hiding. Tsunade sighed. "Naruto, you're being too nice. These people have abused you. Had they abused anyone else, they'd be punished as the law dictates. And since they abused you, they will be punished as the law dictates, too. And that punishment is death. They knew that much when they started to even think of laying a finger on you. They were foolish enough to rely on your niceness, but now is their turn to receive their punishment, just like every other criminal. They are responsible for their actions." "Every other criminal, Tsunade-sama?" Naruto asked. Tsunade winced at her calm tone and respectful address, knowing that the blonde was probably pushing her emotions and pretended idiocy aside to try and rationalize with her. "If that is so, then perhaps Uchiha Sasuke should be punished by death for his defection, as well," Naruto continued, narrowing her eyes at Tsunade. Tsunade flushed angrily. "Mind your words, Kame. First of all, it was not my decision to pardon him, and in the way that the pardon was carried out. Secondly, had I sentenced Uchiha to death, you would have definitely come begging me to let him live," she growled. To her surprise, Naruto looked unflustered and a little pleased, even. "Exactly, Tsunade-sama, I would have come begging for you to reconsider had Sasuke been sentenced to death." "Aren't I doing the same now?" she said. Tsunade didn't answer, and waited for her to continue, which she did, in a gentler tone. "Tsunade-sama, you know more than anyone that I truly want to become Hokage. As such, I can't bring myself to allow these men to be put to death over this. Perhaps it was a mistake on my part to not have reported the incidents earlier, but my convictions are such that I love the village. I care for the people the Yondaime gave his life for, and I want to show them that I am not the Kyuubi, merely the vessel. How can I prove that if everyone who acts out their Kyuubi caused grief and frustration are put to death?" The room was quiet. "I know I have no say in deciding their punishments, but I would ask that you consider my request to at least stay the death punishment, and punish them in such a way that their ability to provide for their families is not affected. I know what it is like not to have family, not to have a father or brother, and I do not wish anyone to experience that sorrow because of me." It was so still you could hear a feather drop. Tsunade's brows were furrowed, and she was frowning hard at Naruto. Finally, she sighed and turned to the men on the floor. "Listen here, asswipes," she bit out. "You'd better thank Naruto she came here in time to stop me from making your punishment official, because then you'd be as good as dead. You worthless scum, people like you are a shame to Konoha. The very person you abuse is the one to stand up for you, because she pities you. Because she cares for your families." Angrily, Tsunade turned to the Anbu. "Get them out of my sight." I'll deal with their punishment later. The men, especially the leader, scrambled to their knees and bowed low to Naruto, profuse in their thanks. Think of your precious people before you decide to do something, the younger blonde said quietly. That's what keeps me strong. She nodded to the Anbu. 7 out of the 8 ordered and escorted the men out of the Hokage's office. Naruto recognized the one who stayed as Neji by his mask. I need to get the floor cleaned, Tsunade muttered, wrinkling her nose as she eyed the area where the men had been. The Hokage sank tiredly into her chair. Looking up, she turned to Naruto. Why didn't you report this, Kame? She asked angrily. Naruto sighed. I've already stated my reasons, Tsunade-sama. Your reasons are good, but you should still have reported the abuse earlier. What if they decided to torture you even further? Break your bones? Or even kill you? Naruto's eyes blazed. I may be a girl now, Tsunade-sama, but I'm not weak, she hissed. I can take care of myself. Tsunade opened her mouth to reply to that, but Neji spoke up quietly. No, you're not weak, Naruto. Just stupid. Naruto trembled in anger as she narrowed her eyes at Neji, who continued, unfazed. Stupid, because you care too much for others to the point you forget to care about yourself. You forget that you are human as well. You forget that even though you are a shinobi, you can still break. You can still end up hurt, physically or mentally. Neji stepped towards the door. You taught me how to care for others again, Naruto. Perhaps it is time you learned to care for yourself. He opened the door. If you'll excuse me, I have a wedding to attend, he said, saying the word, wedding, with slight emphasis, and left. The room was quiet for a while after Neji left. Finally, Jiraiya sighed wearily. It was genjutsu, wasn't it, Naruto? The one that you asked me to teach you during our training? Naruto, whose gaze had become affixed to the floor, nodded silently after a pause. Jiraiya exhaled noisily. I thought so when those scum said they always woke up on the floor, seemingly passed out, after they molested the Kyuubi boy. Iruka frowned and stepped closer to Naruto from where he'd been standing silently by the wall. If you used genjutsu to fool them into thinking they were molesting you, then why didn't you use genjutsu to make them think they were beating you up? Why endure it? Naruto's eyes moved elsewhere but still kept to the floor and didn't answer. Tsunade's heart felt like it dropped into her intestines when she realized the answer. You actually want to be beaten up, don't you, Kame? She said softly and slowly. Iruka looked incredulously at her. Nani? Tsunade-sama, surely you don't mean that Naruto willingly let herself be tortured? Why would she do that? He trailed off as he seemed to realize the answer to that question. You still feel guilty, don't you? You feel that it's wrong for you to live because of the Kyuubi inside you, right? You felt worse because of that one time the Kyuubi got out of hand and hurt Sakura, Tsunade said, staring anxiously at Naruto, who still didn't say anything. Naruto. Iruka's voice almost broke. He stepped nearer to her and put both his hands on her shoulders. Naruto, you're not responsible for what the Kyuubi did before it got sealed into you. You haven't let the Kyuubi overtake you ever since then. You've become strong by your own effort and strength, not the Kyuubi's. He placed a thumb under Naruto's chin and gently pushed her head up, and felt anger at the hollow look in her eyes. Naruto, listen to me. You are not the Kyuubi. You don't have to be punished for something you didn't do, you hear me? A spark of something flickered in her blue eyes for a second, but overall the hollowness remained. She didn't acknowledge what he had said, even though it had touched her. Tsunade couldn't get her words out, and sat silently behind her desk. Jiraiya stared out the window nonchalantly, but his hands were balled into fists as he crossed his arms over his chest. Iruka sighed. He put a gentle arm around Naruto's shoulders. Tsunade-sama, Jiraiya-sama, I'll bring Naruto to the tower's rooftop in half an hour. I need to get her home first to make sure she's fully ready. Tsunade nodded dumbly. Jiraiya didn't respond. The academy sensei guided Naruto out the office, then Shunshin Ed to his home. Naruto just followed mechanically. The two elders of the council smirked smugly as they observed the wedding ceremony from their seats of honor. The heads of the clans sat with them. Many had been surprised at the union, and most attended out of incredulity and curiosity. The bride seemed demure. Koharu had been worried that she'd kick up a fuss and create a scene, considering her temperament and usual behavior. The old lady wondered what Tsunade did to ensure she stayed quiet throughout the ceremony. Perhaps she'd been lightly drugged? Didn't matter, as long as the two were married. The Uchiha looked fine and imposing in his midnight blue kimono and white obi. Koharu mentally chuckled. She bet that Fugaku brat would turn in his grave if he knew the last Uchiha, the one that mattered, anyway, was marrying the Kyuubi no Gaki. He'd be rolling to know that the clan was now the Uchiha Uzumaki clan, and their Uchiha fan had been defiled by the Uzumaki spiral sitting prominently in the center of the symbol. Koharu frowned. She and Homura hadn't been happy to find out that Tsunade had gone behind their backs and changed the clan name and symbol without discussing it with them. Blatant disrespect of their authority. But then again, she'd been disrespectful of them from the start. It still galled the two ancient elders that Tsunade came back because of Naruto and not because they had summoned her, that she'd lost her precious necklace to the kid, and that she'd practically promised the position of Rokudame to her. Homura thought that the Uchiha would make a better Rokudame, but Koharu disagreed. The boy did betray Konoha and run to Orochimaru, of all people. It showed that he was weak, too weak to fight the curse seal. Whereas the girl had the Kyuubi under control all the while, and her thoughts had never turned to revenge against Konoha. Koharu snapped out of her thoughts, and refocused on the ceremony. The Uzumaki girl was strong. She seemed to take a lot after her father and mother, those brats. In a way, Koharu was glad that Tsunade had kept the Uzumaki name, and waited for when her father's name would be known as well. The female elder watched as the new couple drank sake from the same saucer. Sasuke watched his bride curiously under an expressionless facade. Naruto was too quiet, and seemed to be doing everything mechanically. Her eyes were clouded over, and her expression, demure to everyone else, was hollow and blank to those who knew her well. He had been rather stunned to see her in the orange kimono. She had looked like she was floating on a cloud, since the bottom of the kimono was white in color. He had felt his heart start to grow warm at the sight of Naruto so womanly. Sasuke had immediately crushed that warm feeling. But the red lipstick looked good on her. The Hokage, who was officiating their wedding, was also rather distracted, although she didn't make any mistakes. He had noticed the same distractedness and what seemed like sorrow and anxiety on Jiraiya's and Iruka's faces. He discreetly turned his focus back to Naruto. He'd been floored, even though he hadn't shown it, to find out that Naruto was a girl. A flush threatened to form as he remembered that they'd gone naked together to the onsen when they were genin. And they'd sometimes share the same tent or room if the mission required them to do so. He wondered if Naruto had even known she was a girl back then. Probably not, he decided. The boy-girl couldn't act to save her life. Sasuke wondered where Naruto's thoughts were. Possibly on the beating she had gotten last night? He had watched coolly as his fiancée got abused by the group of men. He didn't particularly care about her, and kept repressing a twinge of guilt that nagged at him to stop them. He almost gave in, but she had started a genjutsu, he had seen it through his Sharingan, and had painfully dragged herself home. He had decided to follow her home. All the way home, till the time she'd collapsed into bed without cleaning herself or changing, she hadn't seemed to realize he had been following her. Why the heck was he even concerned about her well-being? Probably because she was his ticket to killing Itachi. Yeah, that was probably it. Naruto needed to be alive in order to be Itachi bait. He'd probably gotten pissed at the men because they were trying to diminish his chance at avenging his parents and clan. His eyes caught sight of the new Uchiha Uzumaki symbol on her kimono and frowned mentally. He had been furious when Kakashi had appeared in his new apartment with his new clothes, and found that they all bore the new clan symbol. Only then did he realize he half remembered that the Hokage had mentioned the new clan name. He remembered he hadn't paid attention because the Hokage had mentioned it was just after she dropped the bomb about his ex-teammate's, soon-to-be wife's real gender. It's all for the sake of killing Itachi. He'd divorce the Dobi, get back the Uchiha name and symbol, and find the least irritating female in Konoha, and revive his clan after he killed Itachi. The Hokage's voice floated through his thoughts, saying something about exchanging rings and kissing the bride. He pulled himself out of his daze, and prepared to just do it mechanically for appearance's sake. Make the council relics happy, and he would have the chance to kill Itachi. The Hokage's voice also seemed to pull Naruto out of her daze, and Sasuke saw a parade of emotions cross her face for an instant before she schooled it into neutrality. But her eyes couldn't hide her real emotions. Those expressive, beautiful blue eyes that could only belong to Uzumaki Naruto were showing determination, sorrow and fear? Fear of what? And what was she sad about? Last night's incident? He wondered as he calmly lifted her lightly trembling hand and slipped the ring on, and allowed her to do the same for him. Then he brought his head nearer to her, looking her in the eye. He could see her tense and almost back away. It was not last night's incident, then. But he couldn't tell what brought about the fear and sorrow. Quickly, he tilted his head slightly and chastely brushed his lips against hers. It was the faintest of contacts, but she had tensed as if he was threatening to decapitate her. That annoying twinge of something rose in his heart again as his head went back to its original position. Tsunade said a few words more, then people were clapping hands, and the younger Konoha ninja were whistling and catcalling. The Hokage's aide brought them the marriage certificate, and they both signed it silently, not looking at each other.
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.